Order. Could I call the committee to order, and could I refer all those present to the register of members' interests, where the interests of members of this committee are registered? Are there any more declarations to be made other than on the register? Mr. Michael.
Current interest as being a candidate for the election of Police Commissioner in South Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. This is the first session in the committee's inquiry into the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Authority. The committee has been wanting to do this for some time. So this is our opportunity to look at the history of the IPCC and also to look at ways in which the organisation can be improved. Can I thank you, Mr. Dhutta, and Ms. Phillips for submitting written evidence and for coming before the committee as our first witnesses. So as our first witnesses, you have a real opportunity to shape the way in which this inquiry is going to develop. Could I start with you, Mr. Dhutta? In your written evidence, you talk about islands of good practice in the work of the IPCC, but the rest is basically a criticism of what they've done. Why have they failed when they were welcomed so warmly when they were first established?
Thank you for inviting us. I think the first point to make is that it takes great courage on the part of our clients who are the victims of police misconduct to bring police complaints, and unfortunately in their experience that courage isn't necessarily reflected in the manner in which the IPCC has operated. I think that the cultural issues which arise from the specific points that we've made in the dossier are, first of all, we're witnessing a lack of courage on the part of the Commission, both in terms of investigators and also caseworkers. Secondly, quite often a lack of transparency, which does nothing to give confidence to our clients, the victims of police misconduct. Thirdly, there's an issue where our clients often find that the IPCC confuses its duty of independence with neutrality, and they are two different things, and they affect all of the functions that we've identified in our written submissions. And finally, over the years, in the past at least, and we've raised this with the IPCC, we found that there have been times when our constructive criticisms and those of our clients, based upon their own experiences, have been met in an overly defensive manner, which has prevented the IPCC from learning from our clients' experiences. So I really think those are the key cultural issues that our clients have identified, yes, and that we've identified, and we welcome the appointment of Owers in this regard, because she has a strong track record of effecting cultural change in very difficult and challenging environments.
Yes, we will be hearing from Dame Owers later on this morning. Ms. Phillips, if you were looking at a percentage of the number of your clients that were satisfied or dissatisfied with the operation of the IPCC, what would that percentage be? Or if you want to give them marks out of 10?
I think it'd be hard to give a percentage in terms of clients. I think from my clients, my personal clients' perspective, I think I've seen two very good IPCC independent investigations out of over 20 to 25. So I think the percentage is probably very low.
So it's a pretty low percentage.
Yes, I'm afraid that it is.
And are your clients saying to you, this has got to change? They're clearly not satisfied with the status quo. Is that right, Mr. Dhutta?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, they often find that the route to accountability does not lie in the police complaints process, it lies through civil litigation, and something has to change where our clients can't rely on the police complaints system as a whole, over which the IPCC has guardianship. They're utterly demoralised quite often at the end of cases, and really feel that the complaint system hasn't served their best interests or met even their most basic expectations.
Ms. Phillips, who do they think the system benefits? If it doesn't benefit the client, when the clients come to you and they're dissatisfied with what the organisation has done, who do they think is behind the expectations that have been so sadly dashed?
Well, I think what they see is, as Mr. Dhutta mentioned, a lack of courage to try and to hold police officers to account. And so, as we put it in our written submissions, where there is no independent corroborating evidence, there is a tendency on the part of investigators to always agree with the police officers' accounts of events as opposed to our clients, even though what we see in terms of that evidence is real difficulties in terms of that officer's evidence. And I think that what our clients see is in subsequent civil claims, that evidence is the same evidence, and those civil claims are settled, so accountability is achieved, but not as against the individual officers. And what our clients were striving for was to bring those officers to account and through the complaints process.
Thank you. You may have to speak up just a little bit louder. The acoustics in this room are not very good. Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, can I say that I think the work that you do is a very valuable work, and I congratulate you for it and in acting to represent people in these issues. But the IPCC has called for new investigatory powers. And your evidence has described the failure of caseworkers, I think you were just referring to that, to grasp the extent of the powers that are already available. So my question really for you is, do you believe that the Commission has adequate powers now to properly investigate allegations of misconduct or misfeasance in public office? And does it have the resources that it should have in order to properly investigate these issues and to be an effective watchdog?
I mean, in respect of the powers, I think there are two different issues. One is in respect of the powers of investigators. When they're tasked to investigate death and serious injury matters. The second is in respect of the powers available to caseworkers when they're dealing with the IPCC's appellate function. In respect of the investigators' powers, something I think that my colleague Ms Phillips will be able to talk about. I'll start off by talking about the appellate function. Quite often in our experience, those caseworkers who are dealing with the appeals process don't often grasp that they are able to depart from the view that has been taken by the local force investigating, that, as we've explained in some of our evidence, we've given some cases where there have been instances where the caseworkers have failed to appreciate that they are able to uphold complaints even in the absence of independent or corroborative evidence. Also, there has been a case which has come to light, and there have been other examples as well that we've heard, where a caseworker has failed to appreciate the role of his or her role within the process. For example, by saying it's not our job to look at whether an arrest was lawful or not. And that ignores the clear breach of codes of conduct on the part of individual officers that is likely to have taken place in any claim for false imprisonment or unlawful arrest.
Would you say that's always invariably relevant, those issues? I mean, because there may have been an initial breach in the due cause for arrest, doesn't necessarily follow that a later misconduct can be proven.
It'd be very rare circumstances where an unlawful arrest, where an individual officer does not have reasonable grounds to suspect an arrest is necessary, and yet goes ahead and effects the arrest, where that wouldn't amount to some form of misconduct. There are some cases where, for example, an individual officer wouldn't necessarily be liable because it would have been in the briefing or something along those something along that nature. But generally speaking, most unlawful arrests would necessarily engage codes of conduct and misconduct. In respect of individual investigators' powers, perhaps I can pass over to Ms Phillips on that.
I think what our clients, and I know our members' clients, have seen in the past is a reluctance on the part of investigators in death and serious injury investigations to see those matters as conduct matters, as matters in which officers may have committed a criminal offence or may have acted in a way that would justify bringing disciplinary proceedings. Therefore, despite the available evidence that we see, therefore not using their powers to interview those officers. And I think what is difficult from our client's point of view is comparing that situation with the situation in which members of the public were involved in, say, a fight or a restraint, and the lack of parity with an ordinary criminal investigation, if you can call it that.
So you seem to be saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that you feel that the IPCC has adequate powers and resources, but there's a mindset issue that you both are unhappy with. You take the view that investigators come in and they have the mindset that they're going to uphold the earlier investigation of the local force in question. Is that,
Yes.
am I right with that characterisation of your beliefs?
I mean, I think it's difficult for us to say in terms of whether it has adequate resources. We aren't privy to decisions that are made in terms of, why certain decisions are made on the basis of resources and whether they're made on other bases. Certainly, there have been instances where we've seen decisions seem to be made on the basis of resources as opposed to the right decision on the basis of the evidence. But without the will, without the culture of courage, in the face of conflicting evidence, in the face of death and serious injury cases where there is evidence that conduct matters arise, without that will, increased resources wouldn't necessarily be put in the right place.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you. Alan Michael.
You've already referred to the question of interview. Normally with the criminal events you have a first-hand account taken from whoever's alleged to have committed the offence in an interview under caution. Now, that doesn't always happen in IPCC investigations. There appear to be reasons for that, but what are the implications of that and what are your comments on it?
The implications of officers not being interviewed under caution in matters where we say that there was the available evidence to treat a death and serious injury investigation as a conduct matter and interview. The most stark practical consequence of that is when you come to an inquest several years later and officers give evidence to that inquest which is heard with the jury in compliance with Article 2, and officers, there is the ability to have gained that available evidence that would be got from an interview has been lost, and so officers give evidence on the basis of prepared statements, quite often having conferred with their colleagues.
Do you accept that there are sometimes reasons for not taking an interview under caution, and are you calling for a change of practice or what?
Our clients, accept that there are of course cases where officers may not have, there may not be evidence.
Your clients may or may not understand this. I'm asking what you're recommending.
There are cases where officers may not have committed, there may not be evidence that officers have committed a criminal offence or misconduct offence, but what we're seeing is that there is a reluctance to identify where that is a possibility.
So what are you suggesting?
I think, like Mr. Dhutta said, that it's a sea change needs to be made in terms of a reluctance to, an unwillingness to identify that evidence and to then interview.
As things stand, the powers exist to interview under caution where there is conduct matter, where there is evidence that
so you're saying that ought to be universally the case?
Well, we're saying that it needs to be enforced properly on the basis of the evidence, and at the moment we're finding that it's not. That quite often decisions are made which aren't based on the evidence available, or where it's clear to us that the evidence dictates that there should be interviewing under caution, but it's simply not being enforced. And that's where we come back to the cultural issue, that there is a cultural issue within the organisation in respect of lack of courage in these circumstances.
Thank you. Nicola Blackwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is your argument that if a member of the public were to become involved in some kind of situation where lethal force had been involved, they would routinely be interviewed under caution? And the concern here is that that does not occur routinely with a police officer. Can you explain how the IPCC would normally explain that?
Well, the IPCC have explained in the past that officers have the ability in law to use lethal force in self-defence. However, this obviously overlooks the fact that all of us have the right to use lethal force in self-defence. Although officers have been given greater powers in terms of arrest, etc., this issue in relation to lethal force should be universally applied, and the test should be universally applied, and that's what we're saying. that there should be parity in relation to the manner in which criminal investigations are conducted and investigations into deaths resulting from the use of lethal force with police officers. Now, the interviewing officers under caution point is just part of the jigsaw in this. There are also other issues where we've found that there's a disparity, for example, in disclosure provided to officers prior to interviews. There's an issue there where we've found that disclosure provided to officers is often much greater than that which would be provided to a defendant in a criminal investigation. There are also issues in relation to timeliness, where a decision is taken to interview police officers. Quite often the interview takes place many months down the line, whereas in criminal proceedings you would find the decision to arrest and to interview almost instantaneous. And so there are various aspects of the investigatory process where we're seeing a disparity, and one which cannot be justified in law as far as we're concerned.
And what do you think the impact of this disparity has on public confidence?
Well, I think it goes without saying that the disparity, where it cannot be logically and rationally explained, will lead to complainants failing to, refusing to accept quite justifiably that the Independent Police Complaints Commission is fulfilling its functions, that there is going to be a thorough investigation through which they will discover how their loved ones have died. And without these procedures in place, there is no other conclusion they could come to, particularly where they see the disparity between ordinary criminal proceedings and those against police officers.
I think it's quite common for our clients to feel very much, you know, why, if that was me in that position, I would be treated, why should they be treated differently than I would be?
So a recent case where this occurred, obviously, was the case involving Mark Duggan. Sort of what's your assessment of the impact, the way in which the IPCC handled that case?
I think we've got to be fair to the family and also the lawyers acting for the family there. And you know, if you have specific questions in relation to that particular case, we're happy to communicate those back. But because we're not acting in that case, it'd probably be inappropriate for us to comment. Also, there are obviously rules in respect of ongoing cases and the extent to which we can actually speak about them in public and before this committee.
Thank you. James Clapperson.
Just very briefly on that, on your view as to how the police have seen these matters. I think you make some very good points about the need for full investigation. But from the point of view of the police, when you're saying that the police are in the same position as the rest of us, the police are called upon by the nature of their duty and their oath to intervene in situations which are very difficult where a member of the public would not intervene. And also, what you're saying, would it not put the police on the same basis as a suspect in a case if they were to be regarded as under suspicion from the beginning? I mean, if there was evidence that a policeman had behaved improperly, that would make them a suspect. But without that evidence, shouldn't you draw a distinction between somebody who is a suspect because of the circumstances which make them a suspect involved in criminal activity and a police officer who is carrying out their duties?
I think the problem that we found is that it's where there is evidence that officers should be treated as suspects. They are not being treated as suspects. Where there is available evidence, and also where evidence arises in the course of an investigation. So, for example, where an investigation begins on the basis that it's not a conduct matter, where the officers aren't suspects, further evidence emerges which might suggest that there are discrepancies or disputes of fact, and evidence arises where they should be treated as a suspect. The review is not taking place that would lead to the different type of investigation taking place thereafter. And it's only once we arrive at inquest proceedings, many months or even years down the line, where the officer's evidence can be tested at all. So that's really, I think, the nub of the issue that we've identified.
Thank you. There's a number of private security firms involved in the administration of justice. I don't know whether you've seen the committee's report into the death of Jimmy Mabenga. Should we look at powers to deal with firms that are involved, such as G4S and others, within the criminal justice system, or should they be just left to one side? Mr. Dhutta.
I think, given that it seems there is going to be much greater privatisation of policing functions, and there already has been, we would adopt the submissions made by Inquest in this regard, that clearly an investigation into a death in custody, into a death following police contact or involving contacts with a private security firm like G4S, must be allowed to travel in the direction in which the evidence allows it to. So the investigation shouldn't be restricted by the fact that certain individuals who may have been actors in that or relevant witnesses can't be incorporated. So it's fairly clear, and we would adopt inquest position on this.
What do you think about that, as Ms. Phillips?
I think that's right. I think that it would be, it wouldn't be satisfactory for an investigation to be left with gaps that could be filled by this.
David Winnick.
The IPCC was, of course, created, as you know, in 2004 to have public confidence, first and foremost, in the police system when it came to complaints. Do you feel that the number of former police officers makes it more difficult for that impartiality to be seen?
It would affect public confidence, yes. I think that in relation to investigators, it really depends upon there being systems in place to ensure that whoever the investigator, the right job is being done, that the evidence is being followed and gathered, that the law is being applied as it should be. Clearly, if there are a large number of former police officers acting in these roles within the IPCC, there will necessarily be a cultural issue there in relation to how the organisation operates. And it's understandable why members of the public would be disappointed that in relation to cases of this nature involving death and serious injury, there may be a large number of former police officers involved, particularly given that they would expect the Independent Police Complaints Commission to be separate in every possible way. So I think that the lack of public confidence is understandable, but what I would focus on more is whether or not systems are in place within the organisation to ensure that whoever the investigator, they are doing the right job.
Do you think it's practical for an organisation looking into complaints about the police and having some knowledge of the day-to-day matters which the police must be involved in, to be able to do such a job without employing former police officers, and in some cases pretty senior ones?
Well, this is why I'm talking about systems. Systems of oversight, systems of accountability within the organisation. Those are the systems which are required to ensure that whoever the investigator, the correct job is done. And it's therefore those systems which really need to be honed in order to ensure that investigations follow the correct course.
Do you take the view that the organisation should either be reorganised, or can it be reformed, in your opinion, to give the public the confidence which you believe is lacking at the moment?
Our clients desperately need a strong and independent body overseeing police complaints, whether that be in relation to the appellate function, whether that be in relation to the investigatory function or guardianship. It's absolutely necessary that independence exists, and there have been, as I say, islands of good practice. There have been instances where guidance in relation to disclosure, for example, has been brought in, which could have had a great effect on public confidence as well as the quality of investigations. The problem is in enforcement quite often, and those cultural changes, we hope, can be remedied.
Thank you. Dr. Huppert, Lorraine Fulbrook as a supplementary.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask if you think the expansion of the IPCC into Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, SOCA is understandable, but the UK Border Agency as well, is causing a problem in this regard, with officers not knowing the parameters of their function.
It's not a question that we've really addressed. It's not something that we as a group in the Police Action Lawyers Group have actually dealt with at all or discussed, so it wouldn't be proper for me to give you my own personal view on it. I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you, Chair. In your evidence, you say that the most common failing our clients experience is a refusal by the investigating police force to uphold a complaint simply on the basis that the account provided by a complainant conflicts with accounts provided by the officer complained against or his colleagues. I mean, that's rather unusual, clearly, because the police must be used to the idea that different people say somewhat different things. Do you have evidence to suggest this is And is there any way of getting evidence that this is actually bias as opposed to the problems with investigating something where ultimately there are just two sides to a story?
Well, I think that as we've said in the submission, there is a failure to critically analyse conflicting accounts, which would not be evident in relation to ordinary criminal proceedings. Having said that, in those ordinary criminal proceedings, you'd ordinarily have interviews taken under caution, and that quite often doesn't happen in IPCC investigations. The failure to critically analyse accounts is something that we think is systemic, and we refer to the fact that the same balance of the balance of probabilities is the same standard of proof in relation to those and also civil proceedings. Quite often, matters which are torts that are unlawful at common law also involve conduct issues, and yet where police complaints will be considered not capable of proof, in the words of the investigators and also the appeal caseworkers, those individuals subsequently go on to secure apologies, damages and quite often admissions of liability from the police force in question. Now there has to be, from our client's perspective and from our perspective, it's very difficult to reconcile those two positions, where on the one hand the IPCC have considered that an appeal is not capable, a complaint is not capable of proof, even after appeal, but when the matter falls into the hands of the police force in question, they're able to take action by way of restitution and redress. And so that disconnect is very hard to explain and very difficult to understand, and we certainly cannot understand it on the basis of the justifications that have been put forward so far.
I follow what you're saying,
Yeah.
and it does seem rather hard to see how it would work like that. Ultimately, we have to make recommendations on how the IPCC should change its behaviour to fix it. What exactly would you like them to change to take account of this, while still leaving that space where there is genuine lack of evidence?
Sure. Well, I think the IPCC has drafted new guidance for caseworkers. I think that, as with the guidance on disclosure, it comes down to enforcement. And I think part of that is where institutional themes are identified, the first step in addressing those on the part of the IPCC is to accept that they exist, to accept that there's a problem. That first step is sometimes not taken in our view. Once that first step is taken, then supervision of casework can have that at the forefront, have that as a live issue at the forefront. And from there, we would hope that further improvements could be made. And obviously, the IPCC is answerable to committees such as yourselves, and it would be important, I think, to look at the reports that are produced by the IPCC, but do so also with a degree of healthy concern about some of the statistics that are produced. Because, for example, I was looking at their submission on appeals, and they have referred to over 50% of those who replied to their satisfaction survey being satisfied. Now, if we look at where that comes from their most recent report, and they say that there are 6,476 appeals have been lodged. Now, of those, only 789 people actually responded to the questionnaire. And of those 789, 54% said they were satisfied. So we're looking at, in total, out of all the appeals received, 6.5% of people wrote back to the IPCC to say, we're satisfied with what you've done. Less than 7%.
Thank you very much. At the end of the day, you want this organisation to be reformed and improved and given more powers and more resources. If that happens, you're happy with it to stay, are you?
Well, our clients need an independent body. They cannot rely on the forces whose conduct has been called into question to investigate adequately in some instances, and it's important that the IPCC is independent. I think that in terms of enforcement powers, there needs to be improvement. In terms of cultural change, there needs to be a great deal of improvement. But it's not something that cannot be improved with the right mindset and the right cultural changes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yeah, I think, as we said at the beginning, that it's also about using the powers and resources that they already have available to them, and I think that that's through the cultural change that is needed.
One of the concerns we've had over a number of years has been the delay in producing reports that Nicola Blackwood mentioned the Mark Duggan case, and of course you have to be cautious in what you say about that. But it just takes so long, doesn't it? And in the middle of all this, families are very worried about it. Is delay an issue that you need to see resolved?
Delay is certainly an issue, particularly in relation to death and serious injuries investigations, which then obviously impact upon an already, creaking coronial system to get the inquests heard. I mean, there is a tension between ensuring that the investigation is thorough at the same time as ensuring that it is done in a timely fashion, but there is a real significant delay, which our clients...
And is there anything that you've uncovered which indicates that the race of the complainant is an issue in the way in which the IPCC deals with complaints?
I think we would need to go back to our members with that question. It's not something, in terms of complainants generally, yes, black and minority ethnic members of the public are disproportionately complainants, I think it's fair to say. In terms of how they're dealt with by the IPCC, that's something we need to take back to our members and ask about, and we're happy to provide further
Mr.
evidence
Dhutta, Ms.
on that.
Phillips, thank you very much for opening our inquiry into the IPCC. We will obviously want to hear from you through the course of this inquiry. If you have any information that is relevant to us, please do write in to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lawrence, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to this committee. You've obviously been before, and we're most grateful to you. As you probably heard me say at the beginning, this is our new inquiry into the IPCC, and we're very keen to hear from you on a number of aspects of this. Do you think the organisation is failing?
Yes, because as a member of the public, I don't feel that they're as independent as they should be. Over the years, many of high-profile cases, especially from the black community, and I presume from my perspective, when I think about it, still police officers investigating police officers, even though those officers are retired. And so it gives you, well, for me, it gives you the air of that they're still protecting each other.
And in respect of your son's case and the death of your son, you obviously complained to the IPCC. How do you feel they dealt with those cases, those issues?
None of our complaints has been upheld. It's all the reports has come back that there's no case to answer. And I feel that sometimes they have not delved deep enough, because the latest thing that's been coming out recently is about police corruption around from the start of Stephen's case. And that continues to be that there's some underlying where officers are concerned. And so I think it's twice we've been to the IPCC, and twice they've said there's no case to answer for those officers.
Turning to the issue of police corruption and the call that you made for a public inquiry into the latest allegations that have surfaced in the new information, were you pleased or disappointed that the Home Secretary has instituted a review as a result of what you've asked for? Because you didn't get the public inquiry that you've asked for. Are you satisfied with the review that is now to be headed by Mark Ellison QC?
I'm not satisfied as such, but I think what I look at it at is like a starting point. And so I presume I'm optimistic if there's anything come out of this review, that there be a public inquiry, because I think it needs to be delve a little bit deeper than what the review is going to give us, I think. I've spoken to Mark Ellison QC, and he's trying to reassure me that through his investigation he will sort of leave no stone unturned, and if there's anything come out, it'll go to the CPS, and so he feels that the powers that he has will allow him to do that. But I'm quietly optimistic. At the same time, I think over the years, I've seen what's happened around Stephen's case. Every time we think we've come to a point where you can sort of draw a line, something else raises its head. So I'm waiting to see what happens.
So you would like a public inquiry?
Yes.
And you still would like a public inquiry, but you've accepted what the Home Secretary has set up, and you feel this is a first stage which might indeed lead to a public inquiry at the end of the process?
Yes, that's what I feel.
And are you or your family involved in the review process that Mr. Ellison will lead?
I've had a first meeting with Mark Ellison, and he has said that any questions that we have, that he's open for us to come and speak to him. And I can only take him at his word because he was involved in the prosecution of those two individuals. And I think in the early stages, as prosecutor, he was a little bit closed in where the family was concerned. But as the trial went on, he became a lot open and was willing to discuss things with us. So on that, I'm taking him at his word.
And do you think you've reached the stage where you've had to call for a public inquiry because organisations like the IPCC have failed to deliver what you expected of them? I mean, would you be calling for a public inquiry if you felt the organisation had your confidence?
No, I wouldn't be calling for that, because I think when we saw the Home Secretary, I think is one of the things she was saying about the IPCC, and I had to point out to her that I had no confidence in them because of what's happened over the years. And I feel that if the IPCC was as independent as what I think they were meant to be, I would have a lot more confidence, but at the moment I don't have no confidence in them whatsoever.
And you mentioned police investigating police. Would you prefer this organisation had no investigators who were police officers, that all the investigations ought to be conducted by people who had no connection to the police force?
Definitely so. I remember when the IPCC was first set up, and one of my questions was about ex-officers. I was told at the time that because of the new organisation and that people would not have the experience in investigating incidents, so they had to use ex-police officers, but as time go on, that they would look to change that. And over the years, that's not as changed. I know recently I've heard on the news that they're looking to bring in independent people who are not police officers. So I think time will tell on that. But at the moment, I don't think that they're doing what they were set up to do.
Thank you. Mark Reckless.
Ms. Lawrence, as I'm sure you're aware, the majority of complaints against the police are investigated by the police force concerned, generally it's Professional Standards Directorate. What do you think of the robustness or otherwise of that process?
I still have no confidence. I think I can only go by my own experience of what happened around Stephen's case. We've had, I think I've lost count of the amount of different investigations happen, different police have come in to investigate. And I think the prime example is that during the private prosecution, when we had officers who were leading us to believe about the first investigation, how wrong that was. And then when we had the inquest, when one officer got up and said that he felt the first investigation went well, and the only problem was between the family and the liaison officers. Now, that just makes me, in fact, it made me very angry at the time, because they were making me believe that the first investigation was so flawed. But when it's time for him to get up and speak out against those officers, he chose not to.
When I served as a member until last year of the Kent Police Authority, and to try and give ourselves and the public some assurance as to how complaints were investigated, we institute a sort of random dip sample of different complaints, and we'd go through the whole sort of file and then come to our view as to whether we thought the complaint had been properly dealt with. Do you think that with the elected police and crime commissioners coming in from November, they might be able to play a similar role perhaps in overseeing complaints and seeking to assure the public that they were being dealt with as they would rather than merely as the police themselves would want?
I think where the new commissioners are coming in, we have no idea of the background of those officers and where they're coming from. And so to say that, I suppose I have doubts about that, because you don't know who these commissioners are going to be. They could be MP for all we know. So that doesn't sort of fill me with any confidence either.
But the fact that they are elected by the public rather than merely being from the police themselves, would that not be something that would give you any confidence?
But how is the public going to be able to elect these commissioners? I don't understand the procedure of how that's going to work. So I think until we're quite clear about how the procedure and how these commissioners are going to be elected, I think I'll sort of reserve my views about that at the moment.
Thank you. David Winnick.
Without your determination, Mr. Lawrence, there would have been, as we know, no McPherson inquiry, and we praise you for the manner in which you fought so well to make sure that following the terrible murder of your son, there should be the thorough inquiry into all the circumstances and certainly what happened as far as the police are concerned. Mrs. Lawrence, you were faced with incompetence, corruption, racism arising from what occurred after Stephen was brutally murdered in April 1993. The question that I want to ask you, do you feel that as a result of what happened, the McPherson inquiry, the changes which have undoubtedly occurred, the IPCC, there is a different culture, that what you had to face would no longer be the position?
Definitely, I mean, there's a different culture. I would agree. I would agree with that. But families are still facing difficulty. Families are still feel that they've not been given, or are not, their concern has not been addressed in the way in which they would like to. At the trust, we get so many families come in and complaining that this is
the Stephen Lawrence
the
Trust.
Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust. Families are complaining about their experience of police officers and what's happened to them within the family. And so things may have moved on quite a bit, but I still feel that families are still experiencing difficulty and racism within from the police force.
But less, as you were indicating.
Can I say less? It's difficult to say whether. I think you only can go by what those families are experiencing. And I know there's a lot of change, and within the force, I would say, because my experience of the force is completely different to what it was back in 1993. I've experienced a load of officers who are very genuine and very supportive, but there's still an element that needs to be addressed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. Bridget Phillips.
Mrs. Lawrence, you've talked about the lack of independence of the IPCC as you see it, and you've talked about the fact that many of those carrying out investigations are former police officers. Are there any other reasons that you feel the IPCC aren't as independent as you would like them to be? And perhaps aren't as fair a watchdog of the police as they should be?
Apart from talking about the retired officers in there, I don't really know that much more about them. I know all I can talk about is my experience when we went to them with our complaints around Stephen's case. But and until they change the culture of who is investigating and who they have, then I don't think anything will be any different. You know, the culture needs to change.
And just returning to the issue of complaints that are dealt with internally by the police where they're not referred, or where the complainant doesn't take the case to the IPCC, it seems to sometimes be the case that when a complaint is made internally to the police, there's sometimes a lack of transparency there about the process, with an emphasis for that to be dealt with the complainant and perhaps a senior officer in that police station or in that force. What are your views on that, and how do you think we might make people more aware of their right to complain to the IPCC and to take that complaint further if they're not happy with how a force has dealt with that complaint?
At the moment, there's a family over in Nottingham who's been experiencing, probably you call it harassment from some police officers within the force there. And they've taken their complaint, because I think they went to the force itself and nothing happened. And they've taken their complaints to the IPCC and still nothing happens. And so people don't have any confidence. And it's like, where do we go? Years ago, you used to have local REC where you could take, if there's anything, and they will be focusing on casework. But that's gone. And so families and people are left with nowhere to go. And I think sometimes this is why, I mean, it's like the family I'm talking about. One of my big worries for that family, especially have some young boys, is that they feel that if whatever complaints they're making and nobody's addressing it, then they feel it's something they have to do themselves. And that just is like you're sort of creating a culture of young people getting themselves into trouble because they feel that no one is addressing the problem that they're experiencing. And I'm not saying that's happening to everybody, but at the moment, that's what I'm hearing. And all I can do, I said, the last email I had from the family, I sent it over to the CPS. I just think somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to listen to what the family is saying. And the IPC is not listening.
Thank you.
But do you endorse the view of Miss Phillipson that if it's dealt with right at the start, efficiently and effectively, and somebody listens to the complainant at the local police force, that actually the number of complaints that go to the IPCC would be reduced?
Well,
it's the way in which the front line deal with these people.
Well, definitely. But then if the front line is not dealing with it, where do they go?
So even a robust internal system would not be enough. You'd need to go somewhere else.
You need to go, I mean, see, if the internal is not being robust enough in order to support what the complainant is saying, then they need to have somewhere that they can take it to. And I presume that IPC was set up for families and individuals to be able to do that.
Indeed. Lorraine Fulbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from that, Mrs. Lawrence, you've said earlier that you have no confidence in the IPCC and that you're looking forward to the time when independent case officers come in rather than retired police officers. For other families to have confidence and confidence to be restored by the IPCC, what other reforms do you think are necessary?
I sometimes wonder if the IPC has enough teeth in order to deal with things. Because sometimes, the IPC was set up by the government. Did they give them enough powers in order to deal with things? That's a question I don't know. And sometimes I think that's what's necessary, because, you know, if you don't have the teeth to deal with things when something occurred, then what do you do? And if your only outlet of just having retired police officers as investigators, you know, are they allowed to take on independent people? I have no idea. But that's something that needs to be looked into.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Lawrence, as well as taking up the issue, obviously, of your son, which you have campaigned on for so many years, you've become a spokesperson as far as racism in this country is concerned. Do you think it's getting better as far as the way in which the police are dealing with these issues?
In some cases, yes. I think people feel that they can be, they can challenge racism a lot better than they were able to do before. And it's not a hidden, because I think before people never talked much about it, but it's more out in the open now, so people they won't tolerate it as much as they used to. So racism has moved on, but I still feel that we need to be able to challenge it at every level when it happens, and don't let people get away with it.
Because I noticed the fact that you attended the first day of the hearing of the John Terry case. Do you think the issue of role models is very, very important in the way in which they deal with this issue?
Definitely, and I think somebody, I'm speaking out of turn here, but somebody like John Terry, I must say, he's held up so high by Young, and regardless of what was the outcome of the that judgment, I felt that his behaviour is something that shouldn't be seen as anything more than he said a racist thing, and he should have been, I don't know, that should have been addressed straight away and not left how many months. And I don't think it's been dealt with in the way in which it should do, because young people still see him and hold him up as one of their heroes, and that's not right.
Thank you. Going back to the IPCC, obviously you were present when there was convictions in the case of Stephen Lawrence. Is that ongoing? Is that still being investigated? Are there more prosecutions on the way, as far as you're aware?
Yeah, I'm told there's more lines of inquiry that police are following up on. But there is a level, I understand there are some officers who feels that enough time has been spent on Stephen's case already, and that they should draw a line rather than following up the lines of inquiry that are still outstanding.
Mrs. Lawrence, thank you very much for coming in. And if there are any other cases that you know about, such as the Nottingham case, where you feel would be interesting to this committee and our inquiry, we'd be most grateful if you could send them to us.
Okay,
thank you very much. Dayman, welcome back to the Home Affairs Select Committee, and on behalf of the committee, can I congratulate you on your appointment. I'm not sure whether congratulate you is the right word in view of the evidence we've heard so far, but we do congratulate you on your appointment as the new chair of the IPCC. Why did you take on this job, knowing full well there were all these criticisms of this organisation, and you yourself in the foreword to the annual report said that it lacked resources and powers?
Because it's a job that needs doing, and a job that needs doing well. And I believe within the IPCC there are people who are doing it and who need more support to do it. It's a crucially important job, particularly in view of what's happening in policing generally at the moment. So that was the reason.
But the two key issues that you highlighted in your report were resources and powers.
Yes.
So if we turn to resources, first of all, you have a budget of about 34 million, as I understand it. How much more do you need in order to regain the confidence of people like Doreen Lawrence and Mr. Dhutta and others?
That's almost a piece of string question. I think the point is that there are two areas of work where the public expect the IPCC to be more visible, and the IPCC needs to be more visible. The first is the ability to take on more independent investigations. We do more than we did. This year we will have completed 130 independent investigations. That's a lot more than we used to do. But there are areas, and particularly, as we pointed out to the Home Secretary, in the areas like police corruption, where the public would expect independent investigation, or at least the IPCC to have a role in investigation of that kind. So that's one area. The other is what's loosely referred to as oversight or guardianship. Part of that is the appeals jurisdiction, which has been referred to in your earlier evidence. But part of it is also our ability to dig into what actually is happening at the police level of complaints. The structure that Parliament has set in place has the IPCC very much at the top of the pyramid. But what we are finding even in our appeals is that all is not well at the bottom of the pyramid. Last year we upheld 60% of appeals against not recording complaints at all. We upheld over 30% of complaints into the way local investigations and the outcomes of local investigations. We know that there is not confidence at the bottom end, and what we need to do is to have more resources to actually dig into what's going on at the front end of the system, as well as to be able to deal with the very serious cases and the appeals at the back end of the system.
Because the government took a long time to fill your job.
They did.
I think there was a long wait. This committee was very anxious that it should be filled. When you met the Home Secretary and she offered you this job, did you say, I'm only taking it on if these things are sorted out? You surely couldn't have taken on this job knowing that the problems existed and the IPCC would not be resolved. Because you applied, you weren't headhunted, I assume. You actually applied for this.
I did apply for it, yes, I did. Yes, and certainly in my first meeting with the Home Secretary after I had taken on the appointment, I indicated to her that there was a capacity problem. Capacity in terms of resources and a capacity in terms of powers. And those conversations are ongoing with the Home Secretary and her officials as we speak.
So was it a conditional appointment? You said, well, I will do this job, but I want to make sure these things change, or you were just accepting what you were given?
I didn't make it a condition of taking on the job, no, partly because I didn't know until I got into it exactly what was going on. What I knew was what was being reported, what I knew was on the face of it. But it's only actually when you get into a job that you discover what you really need.
Now, you've started a recruitment drive. We've heard about it earlier. And one of the main concerns of people who complain to the IPCC is there are too many police officers investigating other police officers, obviously not serving officers, but former officers. It's that connection that's a problem for people. Do you have any vision that you want to set out today, which basically says no more police officers, we need independent people to do these investigations?
The position that I've always set out, and I've set out publicly twice already, is that we need both. We do need some ex-police officers because of the skills that they bring, because of their capacity to understand what's going on, to ask questions, because of their previous experience. When I was Chief Inspector of Prisons, around half of my inspectors had been governor grades in prisons. They were among some of the strongest and most robust of my inspectors, and that's why we chose them, because they hated to see people doing the job badly. That's the kind of police officers we need to have, but we also need to have them as a minority of our investigators, and we need to balance that with people who have experience in other areas and who can ask, why do you do it that way, as well as knowing how best to do it. So it's that balance that I'm seeking.
So you would like to see the majority of people who work for the IPCC and conduct investigations to be non-police officers?
That's already the case. The majority of our investigators...
Are you going to make that an even bigger balance, or
yes, we would like to bring in more people from outside, and that's why we're doing a recruitment drive in the autumn, and why also we're training up some of our own caseworkers who come from non-police backgrounds to be investigators. I think getting the balance right is important. And as your previous speakers have said, it's not just about the people you take in, it's the way they do the job.
Final question about, quite parochial, you've just closed the East Midlands IPCC branch.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it was timed because of your appearance before this committee, but why have you done that?
It was led by budgetary requirements. We have had to make significant budgetary cuts, as have all the rest of the public sector. We had to take some tough decisions. We also had leases coming up for renewal, which were not going to be renewed at that point. So that's the background to that decision.
Thank you. James Clapperson.
Can I support what you've just said about police officers? Because to say that there are no police officers who should be employed would be to imply that there are no police officers who are decent, hard-working, law-abiding people. We know the vast majority of them are public spirited and do an excellent job. But there are, however, cases of police corruption from time to time. And I know that the research you carried out shows that the public expect you to investigate those cases, and you've said that you stand ready to do so. What would be the advantages for you to take on that role particularly? And do you think it would help to reduce police corruption if you're more active in dealing with it?
I think it's an area that our survey showed where the public are least confident about the police investigating themselves for obvious reasons. It's also, of course, the case that good police throughout the country, not just in the IPCC, but throughout the country, hate corruption because it affects them all. It tarnishes every single police officer every time there's one of these cases. I think we would like to be able to take on more cases. We would not be able to take them all on independently because Some of it obviously involves the covert gathering of evidence, for which we would need to supervise. But we are doing quite a bit, particularly in terms of the Metropolitan Police at the moment. But it is an area that we'd want to look to be able to take on more.
So we can expect to see you do more broadly?
That is subject to resources.
Thank you. Are you done, Mr. Cleverson?
Yeah.
Alan Michael.
You said that the system remains complex for both the citizen and the police to understand. What do you think can be done to simplify the process?
I think that's something that we are going to be looking at in the coming months. One of the things, as I said, is that we are set up to have oversight over the whole complaint system. One of the practical things we're doing at the moment is to issue new statutory guidance to police forces and appropriate authorities about how they should deal with complaints under the new Act.
So clearer operation by the police
clearer,
forces.
and that's going to be part of a suite of documents, some of which will be aimed at the public and complainants.
Could I just try on three particular aspects? One, performance improvement. The suggestion is that people don't often want somebody to be sacked, or in many cases don't want people to be sacked, they just want things to be put right. Is that going to be part of your philosophy?
It's now part of our powers. We now have the power under the new Act to recommend performance improvement as well as discipline.
Well, I'm aware of that. It's something I argued for, but is it going to be part of the philosophy?
Well, we hope so, yes. I mean, the whole aim ought to be to settle things at the right level and in the right way.
The second thing you referred to was sometimes things not being recorded locally or being recorded as resolved when they really haven't been. Is that a big issue?
It's clearly an issue given the percentage of those cases that we overturn on appeal. Hopefully it will be a bit less of an issue now that the distinction between direction and control and conduct has been changed under the new Act. So basically, the message that we are sending out to forces, the message we hope forces will hear is, if someone complains, it's a complaint.
And finally, with the Lynette White case, we've seen something where the Commission has been extremely robust over a very long period of time, but seems to have been defeated by the court system, if I can put it that way. Is there a need for reform there too?
In what way? I'm not quite clear why.
Well, it seems to have got tied up in bureaucracy after all these years.
I haven't really got enough information on that case, Mr. Michael, to be able to answer you sensibly.
Perhaps you could write.
Please, I'm very happy to put something in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Julian Hubbard.
Thank you, Chair. Damon, you'll know the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act makes a few changes to the way complaints are dealt with within forces. In particular, it gives greater discretion to the police service in recording of complaints and decisions to dispense with a complaint or discontinue an investigation. I don't think those provisions have yet come into force. When they do you think they will be helpful or unhelpful to your role and public confidence in the system?
The idea is to reduce some of the bureaucracy, some of the toing and froing that currently happens between ourselves and police forces. And of course, the whole idea of a complaint system, of any good complaint system, is that you resolve it, and you resolve it properly, as close to the source of the complaint and as quickly as you can. So that's the aim. But one of the things that the Act does clearly is to give more, is to pass more to police forces, including some appeals which would currently come to the IPCC. And that's one of the reasons why, in my earlier answer to the chairman, I was saying that I think that gives us both the responsibility and the necessity to be very alert to what is actually going on at local level, and to be feeding back to chief officers and to the new police and crime commissioners the way in which their forces are actually dealing with complaints.
So will you have the ability to at least scrutinise in some way what happens within the police forces, or will it be essentially a black box that you can't access?
No, we have the ability. In law, we have the ability to do it. Clearly, we don't want to turn ourselves into an inspectorate, but we do have the ability to look. What we don't have are the resources to do it, because what are we not to do? Are we not to do independent investigations? Are we not to do appeals and do them well? So it does come down to an issue of whether we have the resources to do it.
And can you just confirm that there is no way that any complainant would be barred from having access to you? They would still have appeal rights outside the police service initially?
If their complaint is dealt with by way of local resolution, which means that can only happen if there can be no issues of misconduct and no issues of criminality and no issues of human rights that could come from that. If it's dealt with by way of local resolution, then those cases will not come to us. That's the structure of the Act. They will be dealt with, the appeal will be to the Chief Officer or his or her delegate.
And if the complainant is alleging that there are issues of criminality, misconduct and so forth, then they would be able to take it further?
Then there must be a local investigation. That's what's said. And in those cases, the outcome of that would be appealable to us, yes.
Thank you. Mark Reckless.
You mentioned the police and crime commissioners. Clearly the IPCC are at the apex of the complaints system. But what role would you envisage potentially for those police and crime commissioners in the complaints field?
Well, I think that in practice they are probably going to get complaints that ought to go to police forces and ought to go, and dissatisfied complainants who ought to come to us. So we will need to have some very clear protocols in place with the PCCs so that those complaints which fall within the Police Reform Act go through the right gateway. But I also think that at the other end, one of our big problems, and it's been referred to before this committee and in evidence to you, is how do we make sure that the things that we've said need to happen as a result of a complaint actually are happening. There's no point, I mean, yes, you can resolve things for the individual complainant, but actually the whole idea is that then the force takes on, or forces in general take on the message and do things better. And one of the things that we need to work on is the way in which we can develop mechanisms to check whether what we've done has made a difference, because that's the point. And police and crime commissioners do form a place where I would envisage discussions going on between commissioners, heads of casework and themselves about what's actually happening, and if it's not happening, why isn't it happening?
Thank you. In respect of private security firms that are now very much part of the criminal justice system, what kind of powers would you want to deal with them? The committee, of course, has produced a report into the death of Jimmy Mabenga, who was escorted by 2 G4S guards onto a plane. Are you seeking more powers over the private sector in respect of the new powers you're seeking over the police?
Yes, we are. At the moment, we have powers over private sector contractors, but only if they are designated and certified as custody officers. If they have that, then we can investigate just in the same way as we would the police. But if they don't, if they're not so designated, we don't. I take a very simplistic view that if people are doing the job of the police, then they should be subject to the same complaints procedure as the police. And so what we're seeking is power over that. That can be provided and should be provided in legislation, but it would also be possible to include it in contracts being let.
And that's what you would like to see happen. You'd like to see an inclusion in private sector contracts with the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, a reference to an appeal to the IPCC.
A reference to our jurisdiction in relation to complaints which are equivalent to those under the Police Reform Act. That would be a quick fix. But I would like to see it. I would like to see it embedded in legislation for the avoidance of any doubt in the future.
And in respect of your powers to be able to see police officers, which I know you're concerned with, if they don't wish to cooperate, that's the end of it. You would like to make sure that that is also enshrined in legislation.
I would. I have the same aim as your witnesses from PALG, in the sense that I want to get to the truth of what happens. I want to get police officers to come in for interview and to make that as effective, as expeditious as possible. At the moment, we have a system which is, I mean, it's about as effective as pigeon post, to be honest. It's a bit like playing blind man's buff. You have to produce you get a statement, okay, so you need to ask questions. You produce a series of questions, you pass them, hundreds of questions, pass them through a lawyer to the police, months later come back the answers, you then need to ask supplementary questions. This is no way to do business. It's not a way of getting to the truth. I would like police officers to come for interview and, if necessary, to have powers to, in the same way that in conduct matters, the regulations state that they must attend for interview. It is a significant lacuna that if we're just beginning an investigation into death and serious injury where we don't yet know whether there are issues of criminality and conduct, and I take absolutely the point that where those emerge, we need to be absolutely robust in dealing with them. But where we don't yet know, we don't have there isn't any power at all.
And to be fair, there is a lot of criticism from police officers about the way in which the IPCC do their job. the Federation in particular has
Yes.
been very concerned because they don't believe that you're being fair. Do you take that on board? Have you met with them to see what their concerns are?
Absolutely, we meet with them regularly, and yes, I'm very aware of their concerns, and that's the important thing is that we are accurate, objective, and credible, and independent.
Because they don't think you are
independent.
at the moment. It's not just the complainants; it's also the police who have criticisms.
Some police, the Federation in some areas have criticisms. Yes.
Thank you, Anna and Michael.
Could I just explore one area? In relation to the police, there's the Independent Police Complaints Commission, a very robust system. It's been tested over years. But very often in individual cases, the police are involved, and so are the Crown Prosecution Service, where they have an inspector, but they don't have anything like the same sort of clarity in terms of complaints. Would you accept that sometimes it's difficult to know who decided what between those two, if wisely police engage the Crown Prosecution Service at a fairly early stage? Is that something you're going to look at in terms of an equity of investigation, particularly when there's overlap between the responsibilities of the two?
I'm reluctant to get into thinking out loud about what the CPS might need by way of
Are you going to
inspection.
think about it quietly then?
But I might, yes. I mean, certainly in the review of Article 2 of deaths that follow police contact, we're looking at the whole range of what happens, and it is certainly a problem for us that we don't have any powers at all about the outcomes of what happens. In the sense that where we feel that there may have been criminal conduct, we pass it over to the CPS, who, quite rightly, as an independent prosecuting authority, must make their own decisions. Where we decide there's a case to answer for misconduct, the police carry out the misconduct proceedings as they choose, and we're not responsible for the outcome. I think very often in the public mind, there is dissatisfaction with the eventual outcome, which backtracks to dissatisfaction with the IPCC. And I think we need to make clear where our jurisdiction begins and ends, and also to look at those joins.
I appreciate that sometimes it's that people are looking for a specific outcome, and if they don't get that, they're not satisfied. But in other cases, it's a question of being satisfied that they've been listened to and that somebody's got to the bottom of what went wrong.
Absolutely.
Would you accept that there is a need to look at systems more widely, not just the way that police operate, but the way that police officers operate within the wider criminal justice system?
Absolutely. And I think that's where some of the dissatisfaction with our appeals jurisdiction comes from, that we are a paper-based appellate authority. We do need to get beneath that to how complainants are dealt. It is very often, as you say, the way in which a less serious complaint, but a complaint that's nevertheless important to the citizen and goes to the whole issue of the relationship between citizens and the police. That's what we need to get to.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Daman, you have launched this review into how the Commission deals with serious cases. And I'm just wondering why you feel that review is actually necessary. Do you think that that's going to uncover issues that need urgent remedial action? And what's it uncovered so far, this review?
Well, two preliminary points. First of all, I didn't start the review. It was already in train before I was appointed. And secondly, it hasn't yet started. And the reason it hasn't started is because I've had a few other things to do since I was appointed, like appointing some new commissioners, like the process for appointment of new commissioners. So it will kick off properly in the autumn. I think the impetus for the review, which is just a review into the way deaths following police contact are looked at and investigated, not all serious cases, is because of some of the concerns that you've already heard from witnesses and you've heard in evidence, and a desire to have a proper conversation with those affected, with families and communities, and with those representing them, with some of the people who've been critical of the IPCC, about the way that we carry out those investigations, and then to decide what we need to do it better.
So is this review going to uncover some attitudinal problems within the IPCC? I mean, some of the evidence that we've heard indicates a belief in some quarters that really it's not a question of resources or powers available to the IPCC, but it's an attitude issue. It's a culture of accepting what investigators from the IPCC are told by local police forces when they go and inquire into matters. It's something that is an inbuilt cultural acceptance of police accounts of what has gone wrong. Is that something you're confident that you can deal with?
It's something that I, like you, have heard. I have to say it is not something that I have observed in my conversations with people who are actually doing those investigations. Quite the contrary, that there is a healthy scepticism very often about the first account. And I think one of the things that we have talked about quite a lot internally in the IPCC is the fact that the first account you get is very often the police account by definition. And you must treat that as something which is alleged in the same way that you would treat anything else that was told to you at that point, that you must start off, you know, with a blank page. And I think that's part of, in general, how we need to do our work, and it's certainly an approach that I'm seeing.
Do you accept that just because one set of accounts gives one account and the other gives a diametrically opposite account, is that something that's invariably going to result in a finding of no case to answer as far as the IPCC are concerned?
No, it isn't. It isn't at all. I think, first of all, distinguishing between investigations and appeals. In investigations, obviously, we have the chance to dig into that a great deal, which is precisely what we do, why we need powers to compel people to come for interview, for example. Why we, in the Ian Tomlinson death, why we looked at 1,200 hours of CCTV. So in investigations, we have the resources, we have the ability to dig in. In appeals, it's more complicated because we get 6,500 appeals a year. We can't do 6,500 mini investigations. But having said that, following discussions with people like Pal, your early witnesses, we have issued new guidance to our caseworkers, which does remind them what the balance of probabilities means and the lawfulness issue that was brought earlier. We do listen. We are not always as defensive as may seem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicola Blackwood is the
Thank
final
you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned sort of earlier concerns about resources, and you weren't sure sort of what you could not do. But most of us think the IPCC merely supervises police authorities, but sort of we're quite surprised to read that you also supervise UKBA, SOCA, HMRC, and of course we've got the NCA coming online as well. So I just wonder if you could tell me sort of what proportion of your work involves supervision of those other bodies, and what sort of supervisory roles does that incur?
I'm afraid I can't give you a quantitative answer to that, but I can certainly provide evidence in writing to the committee. Basically, any work that we do for them is paid for separately.
Okay.
So the 34 million budget includes the money that will be paid to us by those other authorities for doing work for them and on their behalf.
But with the same number of staff and the same resources that you have in physical terms?
Well, no, it would be in addition to the budget that comes from the Home Office.
Okay.
But it is still, given that, a small budget. As we've said many times in many forums, we have fewer resources than the Professional Standards Department of the Metropolitan Police alone.
Okay. And have you been involved in discussions about exactly how it will work when the NCA comes online and how that will change the way that you're working?
Not yet, no. But those discussions are beginning to happen.
Okay.
Dame, there's no regulatory framework at the moment to ensure that your recommendations are followed up or enforced. You can make your recommendations, but chief constables and indeed the commissioner, they don't need to implement them. Are you seeking legislation to ensure that that happens as well?
Yes, one of the statutory powers that we're asking for is that there should be some formal response to our recommendations. There should be a requirement formally to respond with an action plan and so on. Having said that, I think if that exists, then that does put a responsibility on us to check what is actually happening. One of the most effective things I was able to do as Chief Inspector of Prisons, having absolutely no regulatory power whatsoever over any prison, was year on year to report on how many of our recommendations had been achieved or partially achieved. And that's really important for an independent regulatory body, to be able to show that you've made a difference. So I think the requirement to report back on recommendations, and indeed on other findings, why is it, for example, there is such inconsistency among police forces in the number of complaints they record and the number of complaints they uphold?
This goes back to the problem raised by Ms Phillips and with Doreen Lawrence. If it's dealt with in the first place,
exactly,
in a way that reassures people without delay, the need for people to complain to the IPCC will diminish. So do you feel you have a role in training police officers and police forces as to how they should deal with these complaints? Because there doesn't seem to be an organisation doing this at the moment. It could save people a lot of time and the taxpayer a lot of money.
Yes, I think if we were to become a police training body, that would be entirely different. I do think that has to be the responsibility of the police services. But what we are doing, as I was saying to Mr Michael, is reissuing our statutory guidance. And I will be looking to our commissioners and to the others with contacts in forces to be pressing chief officers and their representatives, and also the new police and crime commissioners, as to how that guidance is being used. At the moment, we are getting more appeals rather than less. It has started to flatten out, but I would want to see a decrease in the number of appeals coming to us, which represented good work earlier on.
In terms of the number of ethnic minority investigators you have, a number of women investigators, what is the percentage?
I can tell you in terms of black and minority ethnic. I can't tell you in terms of women, but I can let you have that in writing. It's about 13% of our investigators are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds as we speak.
Thank you. Now, what you've set out today in this first session of the committee's inquiry is quite a long wish list. And having heard from Mrs Lawrence and from others today, that's going to get much longer. It may well end up the organisation that you chair is going to be quite different from the organisation that you took over so very recently. Are you ready for this?
I don't think it's going to be that different. I think what I'm seeking is the ability to do what the IPCC was set up to do, and what people within the IPCC, in my experience, want to be able to do. So I don't think I'm not talking revolution. What I'm talking about is for an organisation that has been operating for 8 years, that has learned a lot, that has made some mistakes along the way, but has made a difference along the way. Fewer deaths in custody, fewer road traffic deaths from police contact, a lot of work on domestic violence, as well as individuals whose cases have been able to be investigated properly. What I'm looking for is the ability to take that on for the next however long and be able to do what we need to do.
So in a year's time, when you come back before us to tell us the progress that's been made, what is your headline figure that you'd like to tell the committee? Well, we've made these improvements.
In a year's time, I would want some of those areas that we've talked about to be for us to have developed, to be developing ways of dealing with it. I would want to be able to tell you that not only have we got a grip on our own investigations and appeals, which has already been happening, but that we have a better sense of what's happening in police forces. I would want to be able to tell you that we have got or about to get sufficient resources and powers for us to be able to do the job that we want to do.
Dayman, thank you very much for coming today on the first day of our inquiry into the IPCC. We will be writing to you in the course of our inquiry, and if you've got any information that will be of assistance to the committee, I'd be most grateful if you could send it to us.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dayman. Buckles, Mr. Horseman-Sewell, please be seated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. This is the committee's continuing inquiry into Olympic security. I'm most grateful to you for agreeing to come to give evidence to us on the last day of the parliamentary session. I want to make it clear that the committee is also going to be seeing the Home Secretary. She's agreed to come on the 10th of September, and Mr. Charles Farr and the Chief Inspector of Her Majesty's Inspectorate will also be asked to give evidence, along with HoC and the Metropolitan Police. So you are not an isolated witness in this inquiry. Mr. Buckles, since last Thursday, when this matter was raised in the House of Commons, your company's value, I think, has gone down by 9%. Your chairman has issued a statement not necessarily backing your position. Mm-hmm. The British Home Secretary has said that the responsibility for the lack of security staff rests entirely with yourselves as those contracted to deal with this issue. And I can't recall a statement in the House where members on all sides of the House were so concerned by a private sector provider. Why are you still in your post?
My first priority is clearly to make sure we deliver as many people as we can on this contract. That's got to be my number one priority. It's not about me, it's about making sure we deliver the contract. Secondly, I feel I'm the right person at the moment to make sure that happens and make sure that our company comes out of this with its reputation intact. My future is my third concern and not my current concern. But certainly my view and the view of the board is I'm the best person at the moment to take this through to its final conclusion.
So you will accept ultimate responsibility for what members of this House have called a fiasco and a shambles. You will take that responsibility. You may be making sure that it is delivered now, but ultimately you will agree that somebody has to be responsible for this.
As CEO of the group, I'm accountable for the delivery of this contract.
But you have not delivered the contract, clearly. We saw the statement that has been issued by the chairman, and you used the phrase that you were disappointed not to be able to deliver the contract. I am disappointed when my football team does not win the championship. Surely there is a better word to describe the responsibility that G4S has for leaving the government and the people of this country in the position that they are in.
I think I said I was deeply disappointed. I've also gone on record as saying I'm very embarrassed about the situation as well. That's all I can really say.
So you're just deeply disappointed and embarrassed. You're not sorry?
I've already said I'm sorry, absolutely. Deeply sorry.
And as far as G4S is concerned, I've seen a number of your appearances on television over the last few days. You describe yourself as a very large company. You say you have 666,000 employees. Is that right?
That is correct.
By my reckoning, that's bigger than the number of people who live in Luxembourg. And you have your own flag and your own company song. Why were you not able to provide the necessary people in order to fulfil this contract?
It's a complex contract, very, very complex. We signed it in December. We signed the contract, it's our contract. But to get 10,000 people plus on the ground in a relatively short period of time has been a huge logistical challenge. We didn't know that the contract was not going to perform until very late on, purely because the whole process is very back-ended in terms of getting everybody ready for the games. So we had filters in place all the way through from March onwards to see how well we were progressing in that recruitment drive. But the fact is that, you've got lots of different parts coming together at the last minute in terms of SIA training, skills-based training, accreditation. It's only when you get to the end, you've really got a strong position on where they all are in that pipeline.
So let us look at the facts, because the committee is interested in the facts this afternoon. The Home Secretary says that she knew on Wednesday that there was going to be a shortfall of G4S employees. When did you know and when did the company know?
I was told on the 3rd of July, I was phoned on holiday, that they were having problems on delivering the contract over that preceding weekend.
Right. When you say they, this is your company. Who informed you on the 3rd of July that there was a problem?
David Taylor-Smith, who's our group COO.
And what did he say?
He said two things. We've had problems over the weekend with shortfalls on the contract, and secondly, that's partly down to the fact our scheduling system hasn't effectively worked to roster the staff.
So there was no indication before the 3rd of July. All the meetings, all the reports, Her Majesty's Inspector's report last September, the Deloitte report that had been commissioned by LOCOG, your own members of staff did not know that there was a shortfall to the 3rd of July.
Correct.
But isn't that astonishing when even in your annual report you claim that this is the biggest and most prestigious contract that you've ever received, that it took so many years since you signed the contract to know that you didn't have sufficient staff?
So we only signed the final contract, which was 5 times bigger in
Yes,
December.
we'll come on to the contract in a moment.
No.
I want to know the knowledge. The first theme of this investigation is knowledge. When did you all know before we go on to the contract?
Okay.
When did you all know? The Home Secretary is very, very clear. She knew on Wednesday. When did the company know that there were problems? Surely not on the 3rd of July.
3rd of July.
And until the 3rd of July you had no knowledge?
The only flag we'd had was the Deloitte review in April.
Yes. And what did the Deloitte review tell you?
That it was a review for both parties, LOCOG and G4S.
Yes.
Put in a new governance structure, put in a new management information reporting template, and made sure the meetings were more formally organised on a weekly basis.
So you were already alerted in April that there were problems in the way in which this contract was being delivered? You must have done, if you just said that they've told you to hold formal meetings.
We put in place all the recommendations that came out of that report within 1 week of the report happening, and then thereafter followed them religiously on a weekly basis thereafter.
So you knew in April that there were problems. You then implemented the recommendations, but then again on the 3rd of July you realised that they had not been implemented.
No, they were implemented, but the issue was this back-end process of everybody coming together. So the report was telling us how many people were being trained, screened, etc. But ultimately, we didn't get enough people through that whole process by the end, and it was just a question of it not coming together quickly enough towards the end of the process.
Before I open this up on the issue of when did you know and what the company did in the last couple of years, Mr. Horseman-Sewell, on the 6th of July, you told Reuters, we are delivering a London Olympics now. If there was a similar event going on in Australia, I would be bullish that we could deliver this at the same time. Was that a serious comment you made to Reuters?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. At the time, we were still focused, and we still are focused, on delivering the right number of people.
But Mr. Buckles has just told us that he knew on the 3rd of July. You were the managing director in charge of this event, I understand. Is that your title?
No, I'm the account director for the contracts, Mr. Chairman.
You're the account director. So Mr. Buckles didn't tell you before you spoke to Reuters 3 days later that there was a problem with this contract?
I had no conversation with Mr. Buckles before that.
Between the 3rd and the 6th?
Correct.
So now do you regret saying that you could deliver the Australian Olympics? Are you sorry for saying that?
Absolutely.
So you can't deliver 2 Olympics on different parts of the planet at the same time? G4S is not capable of doing this?
Today we're focused on delivering 1.
Yeah, but you can't deliver the 2 that you said you could? Is that a yes or a no?
We clearly can't at the moment.
Thank you. Nicola Blackwood.
Thank you, Chairman. If you were informed, Mr. Buckles, on the 3rd of July that you were going to have a problem delivering your contract on a contract as important as the Olympics and on an issue as important as security, can you explain why you waited 8 days to inform the Home Secretary?
On the 3rd of July, we informed LOCOG, and we then set up a daily working party with LOCOG and the Home Office to work through the issues we're experiencing. So we're very transparent with the issues we're experiencing, but it was very difficult right through that process on a daily basis to see. We were still confident early on that we were going to produce the numbers, but the more and more we dug into the data, looked at the process, looked at the scheduling, day by day we started to realise that the pipeline and the people we thought we were going to be able to deliver, we couldn't. So it was almost a daily evaluation of what was coming through in terms of what we could or we couldn't deliver. And we were sharing that quite openly.
So on the 3rd it wasn't clear that you were going to fail on your contract. On what day exactly was it clear that you were going to fail to complete the contract?
I think, say day by day the information was changing.
Which day exactly?
At
what day would you say you crossed the Rubicon?
The 11th.
The 11th?
Yeah.
So
at an OSB meeting.
Okay. And could you describe...
Sorry, what is an OSB meeting?
Sorry, it's the Olympic Security Board.
Yeah. And could you describe exactly who was in that meeting?
Yes, it's chaired by Charles Farr.
Sorry?
Chaired by Charles Farr.
Right. Because you may need to speak up. The acoustics are not very good in this room.
Chaired by Charles Farr, members of LOCOG, members of the Home Office, members of the police, members of the military, probably about 40 people in total.
Okay, and why exactly at that point did you decide that you were just not going to be able to complete the contract as opposed to the day before? What had changed from the 10th to the 11th that made you conclude that there was just no hope of you delivering your contract so close to the Olympics?
I was given a very straight question by the chair saying, do you think you're going to deliver these people? And the military were there. You know, we had to come up with a decision. And I said, no, I do not believe we can deliver to the full extent of our contract.
But you raised concerns on the 3rd.
Yeah.
Are you telling me you hadn't had that question asked to you before then?
We've been working together to get the information and data sorted out so we can make that judgment.
Right, and it took you 8 days to make that judgment?
It did.
David Winnick.
You spoke, Mr. Backles, in answer to a question from the chair about the reputation. You're concerned about the reputation of the company. Yes. Many would take the view that the reputation of the company is now in tatters. You wouldn't agree?
I think at the moment I would have to agree with you. We've had a fantastic track record of service delivery over many years in many countries, but clearly this is not a good position to be in. But we feel we've got to make every endeavour to deliver as well as we can on this contract.
Mr. Backles, it's a humiliating shambles, isn't it?
It's not where we'd want to be, that is certain.
It's a humiliating shambles for the company, yes or no?
I cannot disagree with you.
Mr. Backles, no, I wouldn't have thought you would. Mr. Backles, you say that you were notified by your colleagues, junior colleagues to yourself, because you're the overall boss, and as asked by, amongst others, Nicola Blackwood, the 3rd of July. Now, you knew what was coming up. You knew very well, if anyone knew, first and foremost, when the Olympics were due to begin, it would be your company for the most obvious reasons, together with the Home Secretary. How is it possible that all these problems accumulated and yet you, the overall boss, were only told on the 3rd of July, some, 2-3 weeks before the opening of the Games? I mean, weren't you progress chasing? Weren't you asking constantly your colleagues what was happening and the rest? I mean, what world were you living in?
I think it's trying to explain the process that we went through from March through to July. We had a weekly monitoring process for both parties, very open, about how many people were going through the process. So we started off on the ground with 1,000 people during June, and then we have to build up to 10,000 people pre the Olympics. So, and we had a massive pipeline of 20,000 people we were working on to get games ready for early July. And so the management information every week was about how many people we were getting ready. It wasn't a case of having them on the ground and knowing we had a shortage. It was a question of having an active enough pipeline so we could see those people coming through in time for the games, in terms of getting their role-specific training, SIA training and accreditations through.
Thank you. Dr. Huppert.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Buckles, G4S does a huge range of different activities and has come to the attention of this committee with a number of other problems that you've had, the death of Jimmy Wabenga, and I think just in that space about detention removal, there were 773 complaints of abuse from your staff. So you must presumably be used to dealing with bad publicity when things go wrong. Firstly, you say that you told LOCOG on the 3rd of July about this particular problem brewing. you must have been aware at that point that if there was a problem of any magnitude, it would have a significant effect on your share prices. Mm-hmm. When did you tell the stock exchange that there was a problem?
On the 13th of August. Sorry, 13th of July.
So you told the stock exchange 2 days after you told the Home Secretary that you would not be able to fulfil this contract?
Correct.
I understood it was helpful to inform the stock exchange relatively quickly of these things. But if you're to go back to the Home Secretary's information, you told LOCOG, and particularly Charles Farr, who was chairing this board, on the 3rd of July that there was this problem. Are you surprised he didn't mention this to any ministers?
I don't think that's for me to comment.
You think it was perfectly reasonable for him to say, look, there's this problem, it's getting bigger and bigger. I haven't yet asked whether they'll actually be able to deliver, but keeping it at that board level was reasonable, or you just don't want to get into more trouble?
I'm not really prepared to express opinion on that, Mr. Heather.
And do you have non-executive directors, and do they have a role in keeping an eye on what you as the executives do in these areas?
We do.
Were any of them engaged with this? Were any of them asking you questions about whether you were performing?
Every board meeting we had a report on how the performance was going on the Olympics contract.
And when was your last board meeting? What did it say?
It said the performance was still going well, because in terms of delivery, it was still going well at that stage.
And when was that?
It must have been within 3 weeks. I can't remember the exact date. I can come back to you in writing on the date.
Thank you, Dr. Hubbard. I'm puzzled. When I wrote to you and asked you to give evidence to this committee, you asked to bring Mr. Horseman-Sewell as the person most associated with this contract, other than David Taylor-Smith, who I understand was not directly involved, but became involved because you wanted him to clear up this mess. Why did you not tell Mr. Horseman-Sewell for 3 days that there was a problem? Who did you tell on the board? Who did you tell of your managers? I mean, it's a company with 666,000 people. Presumably this is a very, very important contract. But you didn't tell the account manager that there was a problem. So he told Reuters that he would deliver 2 Olympics in London and Australia. Who did you tell?
I told, I think everybody knew at that stage.
Except Mr. Horseman-Sewell.
Mr. Chairman, the answer that I gave to you was that I didn't have a discussion with Mr. Buckles about it.
So you knew about it?
At that point, we knew there was a problem with our scheduling system.
Right, that is not what you told this committee, Mr. Horseman-Sewell. When I put to you that the comment you made on the 6th of July was that you could deliver 2 Olympics games, one in Australia and one in London, you said that you had not had a conversation with Mr. Buckles. Are you now telling us that you knew that there were problems, but you still made that statement?
Our assessment, right up until...
No, forget about our assessment. What was your knowledge?
My knowledge was that right up until the day before the OSB meeting that has been discussed, we were clearly projecting that we would still continue to deliver the workforce that we've been contracted to provide.
No, Mr. that is too vague. I'm talking about a statement you made to an international news agency saying that everything was all right on the 6th of July. You knew on the 6th of July that there were problems in dealing with this contract. You must have known. There was the Deloitte report, and Mr. Buckles knew. Unless Mr. Buckles kept it to himself, he must have told somebody else. Did you know when you made that statement to Reuters that you could not deliver the London Olympics, let alone the Australian Olympics?
Mr. Chairman, I sincerely believed at the time that we could do.
So you did not know?
No, I knew that there had been problems in delivering the contract. Any complex project has problems all along.
So you knew on the 6th of July? And we have dealt with those
problems every time they've arisen.
So you knew on the 6th of July?
I knew about the specific scheduling problem, yes.
Thank you. Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Buckles, you've said in answer to earlier questions that this was complex, and that explains why there was a breakdown in your company's processes and that you didn't have knowledge until just days beforehand. But yours is the 3rd largest private employer in the world, isn't it? It's been reported as having over 650,000 employees. I understand that the turnover was up 4% last year, and is something in the region of £7.5 billion a year. It is an enormous company. The loss that you've referred to on this contract as £50 million is actually a pittance, isn't it, to your company? And is it not the case that actually you didn't see this as something that was a priority within the company? And it's not a question of the complexity, but a question of competence within your organisation and getting it right.
£50 million is a huge amount of money to our company. We make £500 million a year, so it's 10% of our profits. So it's a significant impact, and hence the share price, which has come down about 15% actually in the last 3 days.
Your share price has come down 15% because of your company's negligence?
Because we haven't been able to deliver on a contract, that is correct. So in answer to your question about the management, I mean, we have had exclusive management focused on this contract for 2 years. Within the organisation, it was ring-fenced as a separate subsidiary within our UK businesses with a full management structure, a full management team, a full project board sitting over the top of it to review its progress every month.
But do you accept, Mr. Buckles, that people in this country are sick of huge corporations like yours, thinking that they can get away with anything, thinking that they can charge hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer to deliver a service that has crucial reputational importance to this country as well as to your company, and then fail to deliver and fail to tell anybody that there's a problem until days beforehand? It's simply inexcusable, isn't it?
I've explained how the timing issue has worked out, but in terms of the importance of the contract to us, it was a hugely important contract. The reason we did it was to enhance our reputation. Financially, it's not a huge issue for us in terms of improving our profit. It's not.
Well, I thought you just said it was.
No, in terms of how much it's going to cost us now, it clearly is. But in terms of our overall group, the profit from this contract...
Isn't that the root of the problem, Mr. Buckles? You've just answered, which is that it wasn't important to your company financially. Only now that it's become reputationally a problem has it become important. Didn't give it the priority that it deserved.
We certainly did give it the priority, and what I'm saying is we agreed to do the contract because we felt we were the only company able to do it, and we thought it would be a tremendous boost for our business to actually be an essential part of delivering the Olympics.
Were there IT problems? Were there managerial problems that meant that you were not getting the feedback further down the chain as to the number of people that were being hired or the number of people that were applying?
I think there could be. What I've said is the board have said they're going to do a major review, clearly, of the contract.
Well, hold on. It could be. I mean, we're in a situation days before the Olympics that you haven't been able to deliver. So obviously there is, isn't there?
But what I'm saying is our focus has got to be on delivering the contract. We will find out exactly what has been the problem. With hindsight, there's no point in us spending time.
As will this committee and our inquiry. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Lorraine Fulbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Buckles, I'd like to go back to the first contract you signed with LOCOG in December 2010, where you were contracted to supply 2,000 security personnel. At what stage did you start to retain 2,000 personnel? The day it was signed?
You can't... with our business model, you wouldn't have started recruiting them until this year anyway,
so
apart from the management team.
Can you tell the committee when you started to recruit from that first contract to retain 2,000 security personnel?
We recruited the management team straight away, put the management team in place. The actual staff that are going to work on venues, we weren't going to start recruiting anyway till this year, and we didn't know that we were going to have the upsurge and sign up for the upsurge until December 2011.
So you weren't going to start retaining 2,000 people for the Olympics in July until this year?
I believe that's the case. Can you explain?
That's absolutely the case.
So you had no idea whether you could deliver 2,000 or not?
On any weekend...
You haven't started to retain them. Yeah. So you didn't know if you could deliver the first contract of 2,000?
We hadn't started to, that's correct.
So what systems did you have in place to deliver the first contract of 2,000?
The same system we had.
Monitoring systems.
The same monitoring system as we now have, which is a recruitment database, basically.
So you didn't know until this year that you could deliver 2,000, but you signed another contract with LOCOG in December last year to supply 10,400 from the original contract. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
So what systems did you have in place to monitor the employment of those security personnel?
It's this software we have for monitoring the pipeline, and that's the report we agree and go through every week with our customer to say how many people have we had applications from, how many people have been interviewed, how many have gone into training. So to give you some statistics, we've had application from 110,000 people. They do online interview, and we've face-to-face interviewed 50,000 over the last 6 months. And so there's been a cascade process of taking these people through the whole from...
But my point is, you didn't know you could deliver 2,000 but you signed a contract last December to deliver 10,400. When did you start recruiting your 10,400 people this year?
This year, basically, early this year.
When this year, specifically?
I don't know. I have to get the dates precisely on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
yes.
what monitoring systems were in place? Because the people you were engaging, were they on a retainer or were they being paid at that point in time?
No. The whole contract is based on only paying the staff when they do training and then when they actually provide security. That's the contract agreed with LOCOG and specified by LOCOG.
And you were doing this through Job Centre Plus, I understand?
That was one of the means of recruitment.
Thank you.
So there must have been, sorry Chairman, there must have been some sort of monitoring process for people who were getting jobs. So what were your contingency plans for people who were getting jobs while they weren't being paid but had been retained by you?
They would be coming off the pipeline as not being available.
So what contingency plan did you have to replace them?
The whole pipeline process of keep introducing new applications, basically.
Okay. Is it not the case that you can deliver 10,400 because the contract, which I have a copy here, between you and your subcontractors is there's no end to the liability and it's a draconian contract. Is it not the case that you could never, ever supply 10,400 of your own security personnel?
Sorry?
Mr. Chairman, if I
Mr.
could
Horseman-Sewell, I think Mrs. Fulbrook's question is, should you have signed this contract? Because you couldn't deliver it right at the start.
Mr. Chairman, when we start
Did you sign this contract?
I didn't sign the contract in December 2020.
Right. Who signed the contract in December? In last December, who signed the new contract?
The managing director of our UK business, a man called Doug Hewitson.
Right. But you knew about it because you're the accountant?
Absolutely.
Were you part of the negotiations?
I was present when it was
Excellent.
signed.
So if you could answer Mrs. Fulbrook's question.
So, to the first part of your question, Mrs. Fulbrook, at the point that we signed a contract in December 2010, as you quite rightly say, it required us to source 2,000 people as part of an overall security workforce of 10,000 people.
But 8,000 of those were being provided by Bridging the Gap and volunteers?
Just Bridging the Gap, actually, not volunteers. There were no volunteers conceived of in the security workforce at that stage. The 2,000, we were extremely confident about providing those because our events business anyway, most summer weekends is putting out somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 people to service sporting and other events. And clearly, as part of the bidding process, to say how we would do that, our client exercised its own rights of due diligence over how we were going to do that and the systems that we were going to do it with. The system that we would use to deploy those people, you talked about systems, and that we use to deploy people at events every weekend and at other times for big sporting events, is exactly the same system that we have latterly, i.e. over the weekend of the 1st of July, had trouble with.
Thank you. James Clapperson.
You've told us that there was a review by Deloitte in April, and this was a complex project. But the first time you realised that there was a significant risk of you not being able to fulfil your contract and deliver the necessary numbers on the 3rd of July. That must have come as a shock to you, didn't it?
Completely and utter shock. Completely out of the blue. Had no idea that we were going to expect operational difficulties on this contract.
Where were you when you found this out?
I was on holiday in the US.
And when did you return from the holiday?
Same day.
Same day. What steps did you take when you returned the same day to find out what had gone wrong?
Well, our UK CEO stroke group COO had already taken steps. He himself had taken personal control of the contract. It reports into him through different layers, basically. So he's now the project manager for the contract. He put a very senior team together from our other UK businesses. And I have to say they've worked tirelessly around the clock ever since to try and get the contract back on track.
What you now know, the inquiries that you've now made, are you able to tell us when it was people lower down in the organisation were aware of the significant problems which you've told us about?
I believe it was the weekend before.
The weekend before?
Yeah.
Were you aware of any problems before that weekend?
No.
The weekend before the 3rd of July?
No.
So there's no warning lights flashing, nothing, no problems?
No.
No. We've been told that you've put out a statement saying that you've encountered problems with scheduling, and you've also said, in part, exacerbated by staff not turning up for shifts. And in the House of Commons and the press yesterday, there were MPs standing up and saying that in their constituency only 10 out of 57 people had turned up, and reports up and down the country of this happening as and when the need for staff arose. When you were originally planning this, did you make any assumptions about the number of people who might not turn up?
Yeah, our normal no-show rate on an event is around 90%. Sorry, show rate is 90%, so a no-show rate is 10%. Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman.
Can you explain what's gone wrong with this contract when, say, only 10 out of 57 people turned up at Newcastle, or 17 out of 56 turned up in Manchester?
The turn-up rate is when you've been asked to turn up and then you turn up. Our problem at the moment is shortage of staff, purely and simply. So we just don't have the staff to turn up.
This is as and when the need for staff arises as the Olympic venues and places where athletes are staying, where the need comes on tap.
Yeah.
So it's possible there may be more problems in the future then.
Well,
as and when the need for security arises on the basis of what's happened, staff may simply not turn up.
So it's not a case of not turning up, it's a case of not being there.
Well, not being there, whichever way, there is this possibility very possible by the look of things.
Since we've had this problem, we've been working very closely with the military and the police.
Mr. Buckles, if you could answer Mr. Clapperson's question. He doesn't want to know who you're working with. He asked you a specific question. Is there going to be a problem with people turning up on the first day of the Olympics? He's given you examples. Even today,
yep.
G4S staff did not turn up for a cycling event, so the police had to be called.
Yep.
Yesterday in Manchester. Just answer Mr. Clapperson's question. Or are you telling us that everyone's going to turn up on the first day?
I think what
we don't want to know who you're working with. Just
okay.
Answer.
We have a significant manpower shortage against the plan at the moment. We've admitted that. We said that last week. And then clearly that shortage is going to manifest itself from this day forward to the Games. And that's why we had to have support from the military.
Yes. So his question is, should you have more support as a contingency? Because over the last few days since Thursday, your staff are not turning up. Should we have more people on standby? That's his question. It's quite simple.
Okay. I don't believe so at the moment. We believe we can cover all venues with the support from the police and the military.
What has changed in the last few days to enable you to make that statement when we've seen the problems that we have seen?
Purely that we are working together with the police and the military to solve the problem.
So on the basis of what we've seen so far, you would agree it's still possible that there'll be further problems in the future with staff not turning up at hotels or venues as the need arises for them to do so?
We need to manage that situation very carefully on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's not really an answer. You can't give Mr. Clapperson the assurance he seeks. But you, as the chief executive of this company, knows that everyone's going to turn up to the venues. You can't, can you?
I cannot.
No. You can't give us that assurance.
You've contracted to provide 10,400 guards. As we speak here, do you know how many you will actually provide?
It's a moving target in terms of what we believe we can do. At the moment, we've got 4,200 people working on the ground. Our expectation is the minimum that we will deliver is 7,000 on the ground.
Would you, again, this is by way of comment really, but I'm giving you the chance to respond to it. Do you think that members of the public would be surprised that here 10 days before the Olympic Games, which you've had a hand in planning for since an early stage, and which you entered into a very important contract last December, you aren't able to give a better answer than that?
I can only agree with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, can I just ask you about one other thing?
Yes, Mr.
You know Mr. Mark Hamilton, I think.
Yes.
In an internal memo from him on the 29th of June, he talked about your policy of just-in-time phasing, and it was said in this memo from him, which must have been shortly before you became aware of the problems, and I quote from it, "It would have been an advantage to have everyone trained months in advance, but this was neither practical nor cost-effective." Mm-hmm. Can you explain that, please?
Before you do, could you just tell us who this gentleman is, because the rest of the committee need to know?
Mark Hamilton is the MD of the Olympics contract.
Right. So where does he fit in with Mr. Horseman-Sewell and Mr. David Taylor-Smith? You seem to have a lot of managing directors around.
We do. In the UK, the CEO is David Taylor-Smith.
Right.
The MD of the UK security businesses, because we have care and justice and other businesses.
This gentleman, just tell us where he fits in. We don't need the whole structure.
Doug Hewitts and then Mark Hamilton.
Right. Okay.
So what he is alluding to is, in a perfect world, the contract should have been drawn up so that we had all the people on board with months to go fully trained, because that is the ideal situation to be in. The contract we signed was that you get paid for people on the day they turn up, and you get paid for training them, basically.
But this was 29th of June, which is the date of this memo from Mr. Hamilton, who's described as the head of Olympic security. It was very close to your becoming aware that there was a significant problem, and he's going on here as though there's no problem.
I thought you said he said there was a problem.
No, he talked about just-in-time phasing. He said it would have been an advantage to have everyone trained months in advance, but this was neither practical nor cost-effective.
Right.
Would you understand if a member of the public drew a connection between your just-in-time phasing policy and the problems we're seeing now?
I agree.
Thank you. We will continue with contracts and the shortfall. Mr. Michael.
A company contract going wrong is one thing, but I want to look at aspects of your underlying business model and the experiences of people that you were employing, because I have to say that it looks a bit like exploitation compounded by bad management. Examples: no pay for 12 days training unless you're employed by 5 sessions work. That's not about whether people turn up, but at the whim of G4S. People haven't received contracts, so they don't know if they'll have work. An ex-policeman saying they couldn't tell me if I was wanted, so I had to get other work. A student, you'll have to pay back the costs of training and the licence. A contract that says you have to pay back the uniform costs, figure not specified, and I quote, at the absolute discretion of the company. A mother spending 84 minutes on the phone to find out if my son had to attend one bit of training, and then they couldn't tell me. This doesn't sound like a caring and well-managed organisation, does it?
I think the contract and the way we pay people is the contract that we've agreed with local. There's no excuse, but that is the contract. So they
no, but I'm asking about the way you run your company and the way you treat the people you employ.
I mean, we've talked about it. We have 660,000 employees. We treat people generally very well. I think this contract has been a unique challenge in marrying up, getting a very major workforce together in a short period of time. But
don't people get lost in this? I mean, this morning my colleague David Blunkett was telling me about poor organisation, poor communications and lack of humanity in G4S's work with asylum seekers in Sheffield. There seems to be a bit of a pattern here. Is this the basis of your company?
No, we've done some excellent work over the years for government.
Are you sure it feels that it feels excellent to the people who are expecting a service and the people who are employed in it?
Yeah, I do. I think that our UK staff turnover is very low. We have a very loyal, committed workforce, particularly throughout the world, but particularly in the UK. And we have very strong contract retention and good relations with customers.
I've illustrated the fact that there is a belief that these are not problems just in the current contract, but all those examples that have been quoted, and there are many, many more in the press and the media where people saying they couldn't find out how they were, whether they were going to have work, the recovery of money and things like that, it doesn't sound a very kind way of managing people, does it?
The communication problem will be part of the review. But certainly, this is a very unique contract to communicate with 100,000 applicants and tell them where they are in the process.
It's part of the problem that you were so depending on exploiting people and paying the minimum that's why the organisation has gone wrong.
The pay rate is part of the contract again. That's agreed in the contract. We have to agree that with our customer. The way that's structured between training and service delivery is as well.
Sorry, this is very with the greatest respect, this is what you bid though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, no, we've agreed the contract. I've said that. It's our contract. We've got to deliver it.
So did you win the contract on the basis of really a lack of consideration for the people you're going to train and employ?
No, we believe that is the right way to run this event.
It doesn't look like it now, does it?
It doesn't. No, I agree.
Thank you. Bridget Phillipson.
Mr. Buckles, did you consider that in the current climate you might find it difficult to recruit people with the necessary skills for this kind of temporary work, that they might be reluctant to leave permanent jobs to take up very time-limited work?
It's very unlikely that our staff would have come from permanent jobs. I mean, the pool we were looking for were unemployed people, students, and some people that did want to work on the Olympics just for their vacation, basically. But it's a fairly limited pool, so we certainly wouldn't have expected to bring staff in from permanent positions, basically.
But you were trying to poach staff from in permanent jobs who worked for other organisations? Is that not true?
I wouldn't have thought so, but I can't categorically state that.
What's the hourly rate of pay for security staff that you are intending to employ?
The hourly rate in the contract is £8.50 an hour.
And were staff paid for training?
They will be if they come to work.
Okay. Were applicants ever offered a higher rate of pay, or was it ever suggested to applicants that they might receive a higher rate of pay only for them to then be told that it was that £8.50 figure?
I'm not aware of that. I certainly haven't heard that. I don't know if Ian...
No, but the only addition I would make is that we have recently announced, following agreement from our client, that staff will receive a completion bonus. So those staff that work with us all the way through, right to the end of the Paralympics.
When you met with, on a weekly basis, when you provided those updates you referred to earlier, at those meetings, did you provide figures about the numbers of staff that you had so far been able to recruit?
We did.
And your projections? We
did. That was exactly the information in the document.
So the Home Office and others were aware right throughout the process of your ability so far to recruit the necessary numbers?
Yes.
Northumbria Police in the North East, as you'll be aware, have been forced to step in where there's been the shortfall that Mr Clapperson referred to earlier. Will they be reimbursed in full for the costs of officer time associated with that?
Yes.
Will that go directly to Northumbria Police, or will that be through the Home Office?
I'm not sure of the method of pushing that through.
Sorry, could you repeat that question and the answer?
Yeah, sorry.
Ms Phillipson?
Will the money to be reimbursed for officer time go directly to the police force concerned, in this case Northumbria, or will it be via the Home Office?
I'm not sure of the route to the end customer or the end supplier. It will either be direct or through the Home Office.
So you're confirming today that where G4S staff do not turn up, as they didn't in Manchester yesterday and for the cycling event today and Coventry the day before, that you will reimburse the police for all their costs?
Yes.
Thank you. Could we have Nicola Blackwood?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to take you back to the contract. You mentioned in answer to Lorraine Fulbrook that on signing the initial contract for the provision of 2,000 security officers, there you went through a process of due diligence and that you were confident that you could fulfil that contract because you routinely provided that number of officers. When you decided to sign a contract for an upsurge to 10,400. Can you describe the process that you went through for due diligence for that and how you convinced LOCOG that you were going to be able to deliver on that contract?
Absolutely. So in reality what happened was that having established a larger requirement for a security workforce, LOCOG came to us I think in August last year and asked us to have a look at how much of that larger workforce we could provide. We went away, we dedicated 30 project managers to a piece of work which initially was called Project 21K, because initially the requirement was 21,000 people rather than 24,000 people. Right. And we went away and did that piece of work, and we came back with an assessment that in the time remaining there was a way that we could provide 12,000 people, and we put that proposal to our client.
And was that work theoretical, or had you actual practical examples of previous events where you had delivered that number of individuals?
That work was based on our experience over the period, over the year to date, looking at all sorts of recruitment sources, including things like Job Centre Plus, combined with our experience of running events in the United Kingdom over many years.
I'm asking, had you ever delivered 10,400?
No.
No. So you couldn't provide concrete examples of when you had delivered a similar scale.
I think it's
of
really
project.
important to be clear here that the contract, the scale of operation that we were being asked to provide and agreed to provide under the contract has not been deployed previously.
It's an unprecedented contract in terms of delivering security staff.
But we understand that because the Olympics only comes around very occasionally to the United Kingdom. We understand it was a big contract. But what I think Miss Blackwood is trying to elicit from you is a response to, should you have signed that contract in the first place? Because it was a big contract to deliver. They asked for additional people last year, and the timescale was very short. Mm-hmm. Do you regret signing the contract saying you would agree to provide these people? Mr. Buckles.
clearly we regret signing the contract, but now we've got to get on and deliver it.
Yes, thank you. Could I have David Winnick, please, and then Julian?
I wonder, Mr. Buckles, how far consideration was given within the company to signing the contract, particularly the one that was signed in December last year with provision for over 10,000 guards. Are you telling the committee that real serious consideration was given whether the company could deliver before that contract was signed, or was it so lucrative that you decided it was such a marvellous contract you would sign?
No, a very careful consideration went in from the team in the UK looking at this contract. As Ian said, there was a number of work streams to see if they could deliver it. It was signed later on than we would have liked, but we still signed the contract. And it's not a question of being lucrative. As I said earlier, we did this purely because we wanted to have a successful security operation at the Olympics. It's not particularly financially lucrative for us. It was much more about, ironically, reputation and building reputation for the future.
Yes, we'll come to the future in a moment. But as regards personnel, we've received a letter from a father of a student, 21-year-old lad, who was interviewed and offered an accepted Olympic security role. He was very pleased about this in order to do some temporary work. He passed vetting. Then, apparently, there was no contact whatever regarding the necessary training. All emails were unanswered. And as regards the helpline, you have some kind of helpline, he was simply told, that's the sum, and I quote, "We are told that all applicants will be contacted shortly with their training schedule." He hasn't heard anything whatsoever. And the father says there are hundreds, if not thousands, in a similar situation, as the social media campaigns would testify.
Mr. Buckles?
Mr. Winnick, I can't comment on that specific, but I certainly
can comment on the general point that we've all had emails from people saying we applied, we waited. I had an email from someone in Portugal who's just been contacted to say start work in 10 days' time. No contact for 6 months. You know the point here.
Yeah.
Don't comment on individual cases, but your system is going wrong.
100,000 people applied. Keeping them tracked all the way through has clearly been a challenge.
Thank you.
Yes, if I can just
finally
say this. Yes, indeed. Mr. Buckles, there's been a lot of comment in the press prior to this fiasco that your company is involved in trying to get contracts with the police in taking over various police functions. Do you accept that as a result of what's happened, there would be, to say the least, a great deal of apprehension amongst ordinary people that your company should take over functions now being carried out by the police? That's about the last thing they would want, wouldn't it?
We do about £600 million
yes,
a year.
We'll come on to your future contracts later.
Okay.
If you could just give a quick answer, then we'll come on to that.
I think that we do a very good job in supporting police force back officers, and I think we can continue to do so.
Yes, we'll come on to that in a minute. Mark Reckless, we're on contracts, gentlemen and ladies.
I've also received an email which I'd like to read you. You said you don't want to comment on the specific case, but perhaps you'd let me know if it gives us a general insight into what went wrong with your organisation. I'm a student who was offered the seemingly brilliant opportunity to work at the London 2012 Olympics as steward security through Bridging the Gap and G4S. We gave up our half-term to attend training and took 5 exams to gain our qualification, plus attended a 3-hour interview and further training. This was in February-March. Since then, we've heard basically nothing, with the exception of a few phone calls and unhelpful emails. They have been impossible to get hold of or contact via phone or email. We were supposed to receive on-site training and venue discussion, possible accommodation and uniform and pass collection by now, but again have heard nothing.
Mr. Buckles?
It doesn't, I mean, I need to look at the particular case, and this will be, but overall this will be part of our review that we do.
But Mr. Buckles, surely that doesn't just reflect the particular case. I mean, each time we hear of these venues and where a certain number of your staff are meant to turn up, and perhaps a quarter or best a third of them show up, or sometimes none at all, isn't the most likely reason for that although you actually went through a recruitment process back towards the beginning of the year, you then haven't sort of followed up or actively managed those people at all between then and now?
I think there will be instances of that, and I can't deny it, so that's part of the review we're going to do.
But to the extent that vast proportions of people aren't turning up, surely it's more than isolated incidents. Isn't this actually the main problem that's happened, is that you haven't actively managed people or communicated with them properly between recruiting them and expecting them to turn up to a venue?
could be.
Could be, or it is?
Well,
Could
it clearly
be
is
sounds very vague. I mean, we like specific answers.
It clearly is in a number of cases. I just don't know how many.
No. And may that be indicative of a more general management problem within your whole organisation?
I think the database and getting hold of people and running them through the process, answering queries, has been a challenge.
Okay. And would you recommend the UK government or other potential clients to continue to take up your services in light of what you've done in respect of this one?
It's a completely different contract. It was incredibly logistically challenging. All our other contracts, they start at a point in time, we take on the people or recruit the people, and they run for 5 to 7 years. Completely different challenge and a completely different way of operating.
Well, I don't see how that is a different challenge. Here you recruited people, it appears, at the beginning of the year, yet you then expect them to turn up at venues towards the end of July, and you fail to communicate with them or manage them between the point at which you recruited them and when you expect them to actually do something for you. Yeah, isn't that a problem that would also be applicable to other contracts and your organisation generally?
No, this is a very unique contract. Typically we recruit people with a start date, we train them, they start. There's not a 5-month gap. It's very, very rare. Or 4 months.
You just said there was a 7-year process before.
No, I'm saying contracts run for 7 years. So you sign somebody up and they stay. It's a completely different operating model. It's just a normal employment model. Typically, we recruit people, we train them, they start work, they stay with us.
Okay, so clients should still potentially come to you if it's a 7-year event that they want you to employ someone for, but if it's an event in a point of time, then your processes aren't suitable for managing those.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Buckles, just repeating that this is a very unique contract, which was your words, does not give this committee satisfaction. We know it was, everybody does, because the Olympics does not happen very often in London. Shouldn't you have been better at monitoring the situation rather than, as Mr. Reckless has done, leave things as they are? You've got a lot of managing directors, haven't you?
Yep. The command chain, I would have expected them to run that process, manage the process very effectively. There's 3 levels between me and the contract, and they should be bringing issues to me as and when they occur.
And they didn't.
And they didn't.
Thank you. Julian Huppert.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have to say, it sounds to your previous comments that people should be very aware about hiring you for contract at the very beginning as to whether staff will turn up. But can I turn to Mr. Clapperson's questions? Because you were drawing a very fine line between whether people were rostered to show up and then showed up, as opposed to the number you'd originally promised to deliver. And you were suggesting, I think, that of those who were supposed to show up, 90% or so did. It was just that you weren't finding enough people. Yeah. So can we be clear then that, for example, for the Box Hill cycling event this morning, where there were supposed to be 200 staff, you had and only 30 showed up. You'd actually only rostered about 35 staff or so? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
When did you inform other partner organisations, the police, LOCOG, that you had completely failed to roster the vast majority of people that were needed for an event this morning?
The daily meetings highlight where we're going to have shortfalls.
So you're rostering on a daily basis, and you don't know until a day in advance?
We're going forward. So we're planning now further ahead. We've only really started to get this in action in the last 48 hours.
So because the police, you have this wonderful luxury that the police and the army will step in to cover for you, which is an amazing form of underwriting insurance that you're very fortunate to have in this contract. We'll come on to the costs of that, I think, later. But you're only able to tell them on very short timescales whether they need to suddenly have 160, 170 extra police officers or military staff suddenly going to Box Hill to cover for an event.
Going forward, we'll give them much more notice, and that's where we are at the moment.
How much notice do you think you'll be able to be giving once the Olympics are actually underway?
3 to 5 days.
So you'll be able to give 3 to 5 days notice, so the police will know exactly how many people they have to drag for their normal duties in order to cover for you. And just want to say, you were very clear with, sorry,
is that 3 to 4 days notice?
That's my expectation.
Right.
You were very clear with my colleague Bridget Phillipson that you will be repaying the costs to the police of their side. Does the same apply to all the military costs that are being involved? And will you be also covering the costs of the activities that the police, or indeed the military, would have been doing otherwise? And police have enough other tasks, they're not normally hanging around saying they have very little to do. Will you somehow be recompensing them for the frontline policing, or the public indeed, for the work that they would have expected the police to be doing?
No, I don't. No, we're not. We're for the direct cost of them working on our contract, that's what we're paying for, their cost.
And will you, as well as paying for their costs, be claiming the full value of the contract as well, or are you taking a reduction in the amount of money you take, as well as paying more money out?
We haven't gone into the full details of how that £50 million loss on the contract is going to occur. So we haven't gone through line by line and said, you know, we're not going to charge this, we are going to charge that. That's our estimate of how much it's going to cost us on the current basis.
But there's two elements of cost. One is money that you pay out to cover for the police having to come in, and the other is money that you don't take from LOCOG for failing to do what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
What's your estimate of how much you'll be paying out and how much you won't be claiming?
In terms of what we won't be claiming is the shifts that we won't be able to cover.
So for those shifts you won't be claiming and you'll be paying the police to cover it?
To be honest, I haven't thought that through.
No, Mr Buckles, you just told this committee earlier on that you would recompense the police.
We will.
Yes. So you do know about it.
I've said that.
Yes, exactly. So
but
the answer to Dr Hubbard's question is that you won't claim the money to pay the people and you will also pay the police.
Perhaps I could help, Mr Chairman.
I think you may need to.
In addition to the undertaking that we have given to recompense the police and the military, which I think Nick has been very clear about, our contractual arrangements with our client mean that in the event that we do not provide staff that were otherwise required, first of all, we clearly do not charge the rate that we would have charged had they turned up. Secondly, we pay penalties against some key performance indicators. And thirdly, there is an element of our management fee which is retained.
So,
Dr. Hubbard?
So we will be paying significant penalties to the client.
So just to be very clear, so for a shift that you fail to cover, you will not be collecting the payment for that. You'll be taking a penalty for not covering it. You'll be losing some of the management costs for it, and you'll be paying the police to cover it.
That's exactly correct.
Right,
excellent. What I can't understand is why you don't just waive the whole fee on this contract. Bearing in mind of what has happened, why are you claiming any money at all?
Because we've had management in place for 2 years to plan the contract, and we will have management on venues to help run the venues.
We understand that, but clearly, what was going to be your profit? Because you talk about loss now. Mm-hmm. You said, I think it was to Sky Television, 30 to 50 million pounds, which is quite a big gap between 30 and 50 million. What was your profit on the original contract?
10 million.
So that profit has gone?
Correct.
So bearing in mind all these changes, are you still going to claim your management fee at all?
Yes.
Why?
Because
when you haven't managed.
We have managed the contract and we'll have management on the ground.
But even after all that's happened, you still wish to claim the management fee?
Yes.
How much is it?
I don't know.
Well, how do you know you want to claim it then?
In principle, it's part of the contract that we have been providing for the last 18 months.
Yes, but if you don't know what the management fee is, why do you want to claim it? You've told us what the profit was, 10 million.
Yep.
So what is the management fee?
The total management fee on the current budgets with our client is in the order of £57 million.
57 million is your fee. And you still think you ought to claim it?
Yes.
Even after all that's happened?
We still expect to deliver a significant number of staff for the Olympics.
I find that astonishing. Mr Claverson.
Following on from the question Dr Hubbard was asking you, as we sit here now about 10 days or so before the Olympics start, can you give us any estimate, any rough estimate of how many police officers or other security personnel will be required to do the job which you contracted to do?
What I've said earlier is that we still expect to deliver at least 7,000 staff. The military have already committed to 3,500.
We know this, but what I'm asking for is if you've got any estimate of how many police officers will be asked to do the job which you're supposed to do.
No, I haven't.
No figure at all?
No.
When will individual police forces find out? How much notice will they get? They have to deploy extra officers.
That's something I'd have to take back to the OSB to discuss. I don't know the answer to that.
When will that happen?
On a daily basis.
Okay, Ms Clapson? Okay, thank you. Lorraine Fulbrook and then Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm astounded that we're days from the Olympics and you actually don't know very much. I'm really astounded. I just want to check. When you say that you're going to pay the police, you're going to pay the actual police cost, because police don't work for £8.50 an hour.
Correct.
So you're not paying an £8.50 an hour?
Of course not.
And are you paying for the additional military that have had to be brought in?
Yes, we are.
You're paying all their costs?
Yeah.
And are you paying for accommodation for those people?
Yes.
You are? You're paying their accommodation?
Yes.
Is that a decision you're making now, or do you know this? Because you paused.
I'm trying to remember.
Because we're going to hold you to everything you've said. This is a select committee of the House.
I realise that.
Yes. So you're paying for all the accommodation costs of the military?
Yes.
What about the police?
Don't believe they have any, but yes, we would if they had to.
And what about bonuses to the police and to the military? Are you going to pay those?
We're very willing to consider anything which the military think is appropriate.
Don't you think that if you
It is appropriate,
if
what
you
I'm saying.
contract to deliver a service, and this is a big service,
Yeah.
and that you don't deliver that contract,
Yeah.
first of all, I don't think you should actually be claiming a management fee. I think that's just incredible. But you also have to pay for your cock-up.
Yeah, which we are.
Are you going to give the police and the military a bonus?
Very happy to. It's a question of sitting down and asking what's appropriate.
So you will consider a bonus. They have to tell you a figure.
It's whether, it's simplistically, who do you pay the bonus to and for what reason?
Right, but you're happy in principle to pay for it. In answer to Lorraine Fulbrook, you will pay the police and military a bonus depending on what...
To the individual police and military personnel?
Particularly the military personnel that have had to come off leave and work on the Olympics.
But police have had to come in very quickly to cover your not turning up in the last few days. And I'm amazed that you knew about this on the 3rd of July and you don't seem to have got your act together to even cover for day 1 and 2 of teams coming in. So you have no contingency people, you have no contingency. What are your monitoring systems now? Do you have people who can cover?
No, that's what I'm saying. We are where we are with our staffing level.
So what systems are you putting in place to monitor this?
Daily reports on where we can and can't cover and
But
forward
how
scheduling.
will you know that?
So
Did you know today?
In answer to Mrs Fulbrook, you know today how many G4S staff didn't turn up to all the venues. When will you know by? What time?
Later on this evening.
So this evening you will know how many people didn't turn up for work at 9 o'clock.
Well, we'll know straight away at 9 o'clock if they haven't turned up.
But you, as the chief executive,
yeah.
Mrs Fulbrook is talking about monitoring.
Yeah.
So we know how big your organisation is, but you will not know till this evening who's not turned up for work at 9 o'clock. So you didn't know about the cycling event that was not covered by G4S.
So if I could
So,
help,
Chair,
Mr. Chairman.
what is the system in place at 9 o'clock tonight when you know somebody hasn't turned up? What do you do?
Basically, we've got a full-time team working at Canary Wharf, which I've been working on for the last 8 days as well. And we get all that information on an hour-by-hour basis. I'm part of the team that's trying to address this problem.
And is there people trying to get people there that
Yeah.
you've already you've already accredited?
Yeah.
So tell me how they're doing
Mr.
that. Explain to us how they're doing that. It's very vague. Yes. You told Mr. Clapperson it was 3 to 5 days to get the information to the police about when they would have to cover.
So we're scheduling everybody in advance, so we know where they're going to be going, and so we know where we've got gaps in terms of manpower requirements.
Thank you. Can we move on now to Michael Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Buckles, I want to make sure we've got this absolutely clear. If the armed forces will accept the principle of bonus payments, and they will say to whom bonus payments should be paid, your company will make such payments.
Yes.
And you do not expect the government to make any payments in that regard. You accept responsibility for what's gone wrong here.
Yes.
Now, for how long has your company been doing large-scale government contracts?
20 years.
Right. And when did the pre-contract negotiations start as far as this contract is concerned? Do you know that?
Yeah.
Pre-contract negotiations, I would say, started in the autumn of 2009.
The autumn of 2009.
That would be the tendering process and so forth.
The tendering process, you signed in December of 2010, is that right? But the process began in the autumn of 2009.
We started preparing for tendering in autumn 2009.
So as far as the contract terms are concerned, clearly this isn't an issue that's the responsibility of the staff that you're paying £8 an hour to go and do the job. This is the responsibility of the management of your company. You accept that? Now, clearly, the staff that you just told one of my colleagues that you were still expecting to deliver thousands of staff in 10 days' time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed a further shortfall in the last week of staff turning up for work?
No.
You haven't?
No.
So do you feel that the staff that are currently engaged to be working on the Olympics and that you're expecting in their thousands to turn up in 10 days' time should have proper incentives, for example, by way of a completion bonus to not only turn up but stay turning up through each day of the Olympiad until it's finished?
Yeah, we've got that in place now.
When you've got that in place now?
Yeah.
When did you put that in place?
About a week ago.
I see. So that was as a result of the problems that you knew were coming about?
There was always a plan to have a completion bonus. It was just a question of how we built it, basically.
What is the completion bonus?
It's £1 an hour for every hour worked during the Olympics.
£1 an hour?
For every hour worked, incremental to the wage.
So you are offering your employees that incentive to not only come to work but stay coming until they're no longer required.
Correct.
Do you think, in view of the circumstances, that that is a sufficient sum to so incentivise those people?
Yes.
Thank you. Nicola Blackwood and then Bridget Phillips.
Well, I just wanted to ask one further question,
Yes,
if I
of course.
may. Because as far as incentives are concerned, are you satisfied, Mr. Buckles and Mr. Horseman-Sewell, that you actually know what's going on in your own company? I mean, Mr. Buckles, I noticed that you said to the media a day or two ago that you weren't even sure whether all of your staff could speak English. I'm just wondering whether you're satisfied that the terms of your contract, which will require you to provide either implied or express terms of the contract, competent people who can do the job, are you satisfied that you know those staff are competent and that you're aware of what's happening?
Yeah. The question I got was, do they speak fluent English? And that was a question I didn't know how to answer because I didn't know what fluent English was. So basically, the SIA training course means you have to speak English to pass the SIA training course. So that's a fact. So
What do you think fluent English is?
I don't know.
So what we've been speaking today at this committee, do you think that's fluent English?
I don't know. As I was saying, I don't know.
You don't know whether we've been speaking fluent English today?
Well, I believe I have.
Well, you are now satisfied that they can speak fluent English. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Fluent English is what we're speaking at the moment. Quite simple.
Anyway, order. Could I have Nicola Blackwood, please? In English, preferably, Ms. Blackwood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do believe that the level of English required for your staff is defined within your contract, as I think Mr. Horseman-Sewell could probably have told you. I also have to say that I do think that the performance today will lead sort of quite a lot of people to despair, because I think that most of us had very little confidence in G4S's ability to fulfil this contract before this session started, and now I don't think we have any at all. But what I don't understand is that G4S has 650,000 employees worldwide. Why, when it became evident that you weren't going to be able to provide 10,400, could you not transfer some staff to cover for the relatively short period of the Olympiad?
We are looking at that, but the challenge is they have to be SIA licensed to work. They have to be SIA door supervisory licensed, which is a different skill from most of our workforce. And they've got to be able to work in the UK, basically.
Well, how many employees do you have in the UK?
40,000.
And how many of those are SIA licensed?
SIA door supervisory licensed, not that many.
Well, how many?
About 1,000.
1,000. And how many of those have you looked at transferring?
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah.
And how many of those have been told that they can only be transferred if they take annual leave for the Olympic period?
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I can get back to you on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bridget Phillips.
Why are you waiting for the government to tell you what to do in terms of bonuses for our servicemen and women? Why are you waiting for them to tell you what action you should take?
Because I'm not sure if they feel it's appropriate to pay some and not others, and you know, what is the criteria. That's all we're saying. Just to understand the criteria. It may even be a donation to charity instead. I just don't know what is the right answer.
I get the impression this afternoon that you're kind of making it up as you go along. So on that understanding, could I just suggest perhaps that you consider offering the same £500 bonus that tube drivers and bus drivers being offered to work during the Olympics to our servicemen and women?
I can, certainly.
Thank you. Let us now turn to the theme of remedies. Many members of the committee have already covered this, but just for the record, we want to be very clear. In answer to James Clapperson, I think you were saying that you could not be absolutely certain that everyone that you had contracted to provide would be there on the day of the opening of the Olympics. Is that right?
Yes.
Because you can't be sure.
Yes.
So you're telling this committee now that you don't know how many G4S staff will be there on the first day of the Olympics?
Which is the reason we raised the flag a week ago.
Yes. But since the week ago, the Home Secretary has been before the House.
Yeah.
The Secretary of State for Defence is obviously dealing with this on a daily basis. The whole of government is churning around this issue. And they've said they provided 3,500 additional staff.
Yeah.
But you are now telling us clearly that you cannot guarantee how many would turn up on the day, because on a number of the other occasions, including today, but you will hear about this at 9 o'clock tonight when you get your report, G4S staff simply didn't turn up. To go back to this famous cycling event, 300 were expected, but only 30 turned up. If you take that as an example of what might happen, we could have serious shortfalls in people on the first day of the Olympics. Is that right?
No, we are confident that we can get at least 7,000 people into the system in time for the Olympics.
So is it no or yes? Because a few moments ago you said you were not confident and not satisfied.
I thought you were talking about the 10,000, that's why. But if you say without the 3,500 military, that's a different...
You are going to produce 7,000 people on the day?
That's our expectation.
Right. Expectation is not actually a comforting word when we're dealing with the greatest sporting event in the world, bearing in mind that you already have shortfalls. That's the worry of this committee. That's why we've got you in today. Mm-hmm. If 30 out of 300 turn up today for cycling, there is a worry surely in your mind that others will not turn up on the day, unless you personally go and escort them all to the Olympic Stadium. You can't be sure, can you?
No.
So should the government prepare a contingency with the Metropolitan Police and with the Army for the possibility of more people needing to be deployed just in case people don't turn up? We've dealt with the issue of cost, but just to be on the safe side, should they actually be prepared for this?
That's the decision that the government has to make, not us.
We understand that, but would you like them to do that? Because you wouldn't like to leave venues unprotected, would you?
Yeah. We
know it's a decision for the government because they stepped in last week and made that decision.
We're still confident, together with the military and the police, that we can provide a safe and secure Olympics. We're still confident about that.
I understand that. But in terms of your own members of staff, would you like to see some just being held back in case we see a repetition over the last 10 days, and especially on opening day, of G4S staff not working? We don't expect you and Mr. Horseman-Sewell and all these managing directors to be down there checking handbags. Yeah. Would you like to see something kept in reserve just in case?
I believe there is a reserve already in that contingency planning.
There is. What is the reserve?
I think there's a 500 military in reserve, but I would need to...
So you're telling this committee that there is 500 extra in reserve waiting to move in case there's a problem?
Yes.
Yes. Ms. Dr. Huppert, on this point, please.
Thank you. Just to understand about the numbers that you're still trying to get through. Nicola Blackwood asked you about whether you're looking for other people who already work for G4S. Given how badly wrong this has gone, are you consulting other companies that work in the UK, that work in this space? And have you gone through an exhaustive list of your competitors, the people you're presumably bidding against for future contracts, to ask if they could help you out of this hole?
Yes.
Have any of them offered to help?
Yes.
How many staff have you managed to acquire from that route?
Latest estimate I hear is 500.
So you've been on to Chris Hyams, you've been on to Serco and Reliance, your competitors for this contract, and they are providing staff.
Yeah. Not them, but others, yeah.
Others, not them. Yeah. Why not them, since they're almost as big as you are?
They haven't got BSA licensing in Serco's case.
Right, but you've gone to others, and they're going to help you. And Dr. Huppert?
And can I say, if I just turn away from you, Mr. Buckles, you can have a quick breath. But I'm still trying to understand exactly when you understood what was happening with this. When did you know that the problems were arising? When was your first inkling of this major problem?
The first inkling that we had of this major problem came out of the scheduling problems that happened at the weekend of the 1st of July. And at the time that the problems arose, we didn't know immediately that it was a scheduling problem. We just knew that it was a very unexpected shortfall in staff turning up for work.
So your first awareness was on the 1st, and you made sure that Mr. Buckles was told?
We spent the intervening time between then and Mr. Buckles being told, trying to work out what had happened and ascertained that it appeared to be a scheduling system.
And do you think there are any staff within G4S who should have noticed this earlier and told either of you?
Until we do a detailed review of, down into all of the functional areas, I cannot answer that question.
But you'll be doing that review, will you share it with this committee?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
could I please just venture something on data? So
yes.
We've talked about the cycling event as an example, and I'd like to share with the committee actually what's happening here. So actually, the demand placed on G4S for Box Hill today was 38 people, not 200, not 300, 38 people at 9 o'clock this morning.
And how many turned up?
Yesterday and the day before, as we worked through our planning, facing the shortfalls that we've now faced, we said to our partners in this now, the military and the police, that we thought we would be providing 50% of that workforce. That's what it looked like at that venue. 17 people have turned up from G4S to work today. So those are the 17 people we expected to show up. They're not no-shows, they're just people that are in our shortfall. So as we're building into this, what we're finding is when we schedule somebody for work, in the cohort that we've built, they turn up. And that's really important.
The figures given in the House yesterday were correct by the Home Secretary. You're not saying they were wrong by other members. The people didn't turn up on Monday. In Manchester, for example.
I think there's a confusion of people not turning up who were scheduled and accepted the task of turning up, and those that are part of the shortfall.
Right.
And it's a really important planning.
Forget the shortfall. I think what the committee is interested in is if somebody says they're going to turn up to work in the morning, they're there.
All of that.
That's what we're concerned with.
All of that analysis, which we're sharing with the military and the police who need to be confident in that analysis, suggests that the answer is yes.
Mr. Michael?
Could you just clarify then, with the examples of people that I quoted, saying they hadn't been told whether they were being employed, where they were being told that money was going to be recovering from them, where they've been left in uncertainty, do those come in your figures as confirmed or not confirmed?
No, those are the people that we are saying are confirmed are people who have gone all the way through the process and therefore not had the experience that.
But why have you got an organisation that allows so many people to drop out during the course of the process then?
It's back to the issue about process and communication through the way, which I have said we had problems with, and that's one of our key issues on recruitment.
Problems within your organisation?
With communicating with the workforce.
Yes. Could we... Thank you. A quick supplementary from Lorraine Fulbrook and Nicola
Can you
Blackwood.
explain specifically to the committee what scheduling is?
Yes, absolutely. So our scheduling system matches the demand for work that has been given to us by our client in fine detail, 3 people here, 2 people there, 10 people there, matches that to our database of individuals who are what we call deployable. That means they have all of the necessary things in place to deploy, whether that's a license, a completed training record, and so forth. And the scheduling process picks up people who've got all of those things and fit a particular schedule of work or a shift and assigns them to it. People then have the option to accept that work. And when they accept that work, typically online, our experience over recent days, since we've all deployed to surge people in to look at what's been going on, is that people that accept work turn up to work.
So who are these people that haven't been turning up then? Have they accepted work or just...
No. Please be clear. So those people that are deemed very often in sort of general parlance as being people who have not turned up, the point here is that we were not able to schedule somebody to that work in the first place because we've experienced this shortfall. So it isn't that I said Ian Horseman-Sewell is going to turn up at Box Hill tomorrow and he didn't turn up. There wasn't an Ian Horseman-Sewell to go to that shift. That's our shortfall.
Thank you. Yes, very quickly, Mrs. Fulbrook.
Are the military and the police forces who are involved being directed by G4S?
No, it's a combined control meeting that we have every day to decide where to allocate resources, but it's particularly led by the military.
Thank you. Nicola Blackwood.
Thank you, Chair. So, how on your scheduling system that isn't working, how many deployable people do you have on there?
5,500.
5,500, and they are all accredited, fully accredited. And what percentage of those, when they are matched to a deployment, are accepting that deployment?
What percentage of those are matched?
It's about 70%.
70%
so far, but they're building up every day, basically.
Okay. And how many people are being added every day to that list of deployable people?
About 500.
500 a day? Yeah. Okay. And how many people fall off every day because they get another job?
We don't know that until they don't respond to the email, basically.
You have no system of working out whether someone has decided not to. There's no requirement within their contract for them to inform you if they're not going to carry on.
No.
Thank you.
Right.
Let us move on to our final theme, which is to do with lessons to be learned. We appreciate that you're going to have a review. The committee, of course, is going to look at this matter when we have the Home Secretary before us. But for the record, which Home Office officials, now you mentioned Charles Farr, who chaired the Olympic Security Board, and of course Paul Dighton is the Chief Executive of LOCOG. Mm-hmm. You're telling the committee, of course, and I'm repeating what you're saying here, but just for the record, that you only knew on the 3rd,
yeah,
and you informed them last Wednesday. Or did Home Office officials know that there was a problem before then?
They knew we had an issue with scheduling and that we were sorting out our data. We had daily meetings about how we were building, how we were getting on. But
daily meetings from when, Mr. Buckles?
From about the 4th or the 5th. But probably about
in July we're talking
about.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. But you have not seen, neither Mr. Horseman-Sewell or you, Mr. Buckles, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector's of Constabulary report that was given to the Home Secretary and to Charles Farr in September.
No, that was not what scheduled.
You have not seen the second report, which was given to the Home Secretary and Home Office officials in February of this year.
No.
You've not seen the Deloitte report that you commissioned. You have seen it.
Absolutely. Yes. The Deloitte report was a collaborative venture commissioned by LOCOG but acted on together.
Would you send us a copy, please, of the Deloitte report? Because it would be very, very helpful to the committee's deliberations. And apart from Charles Farr, is there anyone else at the Home Office that you dealt with on a regular basis?
James Brockenshire.
The Minister?
Yeah.
Yes. By regular, is this every day, every week, once a month?
Part of the review process was a weekly review process from April going onwards. I'm not sure whether he was there or not. I would have to ask that question.
But there are presumably minutes of these meetings.
Yes.
The Venue Security Board would have minutes of when people met.
Yes.
It wasn't as informal as just having a chat.
Properly governed, yeah.
So recommendations and action points would all be in there.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes. Moving on to remedies, Mr. Winnick mentioned earlier on the number of public sector contracts that you have.
Yes.
And clearly what has happened over the last few days is going to be severely damaging to that reputation. I estimate that the number of public sector contracts you have with the Home Office alone is just under £500 million. Is that a correct figure, or do you have a better figure for me?
It's 600 million in total, so it's
more. That's just with the Home Office. Yeah. And that includes the prison service, the detention service, and now the new contract you have with Lincolnshire Police Force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, unfortunately Hansard can't record nods, so we do have to have a yes. Do you not think that there is now an issue of your ability to deliver some of these contracts in view of the fact that you have not delivered on this very high-profile contract? We accept that for you this was a vanity contract. You needed to secure this contract because it would bring you more contracts in the future. But the bread and butter issue of policing is what Lincolnshire does, for example.
Yeah.
What have you done as the Chief Executive to make sure that these contracts are properly looked at and properly monitored?
We have regular monthly review processes on all contracts with the UK businesses, and the service levels we deliver on the police outsourcing contracts, the prison contracts, are exemplary. They are long-term outsourcing contracts where we do deliver excellent cost savings for government, excellent service improvements. And we really have had a very strong track record on delivery. This has been a major issue for us, clearly.
But there are other examples. I think Dr. Hubbard mentioned the Jimmy Babenga case.
Yes.
Were you aware that the CPS had now written, I don't expect you to have read the Select Committee's last report into this, but they were G4S escorts taking Mr. Babenga to his deportation.
Yep.
Were you aware that the CPS has now written with a highly critical set of recommendations and the shortcomings in training of your escorts?
I wasn't aware of that.
No. And nobody in preparation for this Select Committee hearing has briefed you on this?
I was briefed to say that there was no action to be taken.
Well, the people concerned are not to be charged, but the CPS has written to your organisation, and in this particular case somebody died, Mr. Buckles, so it's obviously a very serious matter, saying that there were shortcomings in training given to security guards and various other recommendations. You were not aware of that?
No.
So you would not be aware if contracts for Lincolnshire Police or other detention centres were actually being carried out properly, would you? If you didn't know about this?
I definitely would, because we have a very strong customer process to make sure customers are feeding back about the quality of service. This was a very, very tragic incident. Didn't mean that the whole contract wasn't working successfully, but it was a very, very tragic incident.
Yes. I mean, you did say in January 2011, when somebody asked you what you look for in hiring senior staff, you said, I look for track record. It is a measure of how someone is going to behave in the future. You remember saying that?
Yes.
So what about this track record of what you've done in this particular case? It's bound to count against you, isn't it?
It is, but then you have all the track record of the business we've provided very successfully over the last 10 years for UK government as well.
Mr. Ellis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does G4, I just want to get a couple of things clear. Does G4S accept 100% responsibility for this failure in this contract?
We accept 100% responsibility on the basis that we signed the contract.
Yes, so you're not seeking to get out of that responsibility.
No.
You accept that you were duty-bound under the terms of a contract that you entered into willingly to fulfil the terms.
Yes.
And you didn't do so.
Correct.
Is it also fair to say that you will now, going forward in the few days remaining before the Olympics, bend over backwards to, in the first place, secure as many personnel as possible to help the police and military authorities in their endeavour?
Yes.
And you'll do that?
Yes.
You'll do everything that is within
Absolutely.
your power to do? Cost will not be a consideration?
It's absolutely not.
Thank you.
Thank
David
you.
Winnick.
Isn't it fortunate, Mr. Buckles, that when your company at the last moment finds that it can't do the job to which it was contracted, there's the army and there's police officers all over the country stepping in?
We are extremely grateful for the military and the police helping us out in this instance. There's no doubt about that.
And for a company that is so keen to get government contracts and the rest, and the Chair made a reference to one very tragic incident which occurred, do you feel at all that there should be more concern about outsourcing in view of what has occurred?
I think this is a very unique contract. I keep saying that, I know, but a standard outsourcing contract over a long period of time has got a fantastic track record of success for the government and for the service providers. There's no doubt about that. This is a very specific, massive events contract, which is completely different to how we usually do government outsourcing.
And which, of course, you fell down totally.
Thank you, Mr. Binnick.
Just one more question, if I may, and if I may return to what I said earlier. Will there be any hesitation as a result of what has happened over taking over, if you can, contracts whereby your organisation would undertake functions currently being undertaken by the police?
We never say we'll take functions undertaken by the police. We undertake the functions that the back office and middle office provide for the police force. We never say we'll take over from the police force themselves, but we can introduce innovation, cost, new technology, cost reduction, new technology into the police market.
I don't know, Mr. Buckles, whether you've seen the letter from David Taylor-Smith to me, copied to all members of the committee, dated the 5th of July, which states all the aspects of policing that you feel you could take over. There's an awful lot in there, isn't there?
Yes.
Which is more than just
in Lincolnshire,
themselves.
you're actually building a police station and running the police station.
Yes.
So it's quite a lot. Mr. Clapperson, then Dr. Huppert, then we will close.
To be fair to you, I know you have apologised, but looking at it, and choose whatever language you want, can you give us a word which, in your judgment, would sum up the performance of your company so far? What word would you choose?
It's a difficult question. Let me just think about it for a moment.
While you're thinking about it, can I put my other question to you, which is this, the same thing I've said in the House. Will you take away from this committee everything that we've said to you, particularly about the armed forces and their families, and look to see if there's something additional, extra, in addition to what you already said, that you can do to make life better for them and to reward them?
Absolutely.
And the police, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Huppert?
Thank you. I've already highlighted the fact that you're very fortunate that the police and the military will step in to cover for you, and so it's a catastrophic failure for your company rather than a catastrophic failure for the country if we had to close down Olympic venues, for example. I think that's very fortunate. You have a huge range of other contracts. Have you ever had to get assistance from the police, the military, or anybody else in any of your other contracts?
Never.
Never at all. And so if we go through, we'll find that that's never happened. So this is a one-off case where the state has stepped in to insure you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Buckles, do you have any intention of applying for the security contract for the World Cup in Brazil or the Olympics in Brazil?
No.
And that has happened now, because in your last report, I think, you indicated with a picture of the Olympic Stadium that you would be going for these contracts.
Correct.
So you've decided not to go for these contracts?
Yes.
As of when?
As of last week.
Now, I have to say, I asked the members of the committee to sum up your performance and the performance of the company so far, and they've used these terms: unacceptable, incompetent and amateurish. Though the committee is most grateful to you for coming in, we feel that those words best express our deep concern about the way in which this matter has been handled. As for you, Mr. Horseman-Sewell, I think it was irresponsible to make a statement on the 6th of July stating that you could manage to deliver the Olympics in Australia and London on the same day when you knew that there were concerns about the way in which this contract has been delivered. In the end, Mr. Buckles, it is a matter for you to decide what you do about your future.
I agree.
But this committee will continue to monitor very carefully what happens over the next few weeks, and we want to ensure that you're able to deliver, with the police and the military, the best games the world has ever seen.
Agreed.
Then, of course, it is for you to decide what you want to do about your future.
Agreed.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Order, order. That concludes.
Committee Room